Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-02. Story 1, I forgot my wife. Something's begun to smell. I'm not sure what. It could be me. It'd be weird if it is, though. I take the time to shower every day. It calms me, helps me relax. It's, frankly, the only place I feel comfortable in. I don't want to go outside. Got work soon? Might just try extending leave. I feel like my time's running out, anyway. I just got off the phone with my doctor. He said that there's nothing wrong with me. Physically, at least. You are fine, he said. Sounded cheerful, too. Well, I really can't disagree more. Does a man that's turned his whole apartment upside down without even knowing for sure what he's looking for sound fine? Does a man whose neighbors and friends have begun to spread rumors about him sound like he's doing fine? Does a man whom would have been overjoyed to have heard he has a tumor on the side of his brain sound fine? And don't bring up psychiatrists, I've had one since I was 16. Anger management. She doesn't help. Really, if you ask me, the worries that woman has are starting to show. On some days, I'm not even really sure she's listening to a word I've said. But I digress. The point is, I've run into a dead end. I have no means to explain what's happened, and at this point, I'm not sure if I want to know. Frankly, I want nothing more but to turn back time and return to my old usual routine. Waking up in the morning. Going to work. Coming home. Falling asleep watching the TV. But there's no real way to ignore this. If not my conscience, something else would eventually force me back into it, I'm sure of it. It started 2 weeks ago. The first part of the routine worked well enough. I got up. I went to work. I went off home. At least, that was the plan. As I was walking down the hall to my apartment, I happened to bump into Karen. She's a neighbor. Right next to me. We sometimes happen to bump into each other, since she's a nurse and often has to work night shift. Middle-aged, but her wits still razor sharp. At least, that's what I believed. That's exactly why the exchange was so bizarre. The conversation started out well enough. I talked about work. She talked about her day. She's raising a kid all on her own. Can't stop talking about him. And that's okay, you get used to it. Just your average everyday existence. All of a sudden though, she asks me something weird. How's your wife? A few days ago, she said she and I would get together for coffee. I've been trying to get in touch with her, but she's not picking up her phone. She okay? I thought she was joking at first. But jokes are meant to be funny, right? A single mother wouldn't exactly be poking fun at a young bachelor, no? She clearly picked up on my confusion, but didn't push it any further. Not because she didn't want to, she was as nosy as they came, but she had to run to her shift. We bid each other goodbye, and I slid my way into my apartment, the conversation still lingering. I stood at the doorway for a few moments, trying to figure it out. Eventually, I just shrugged it off. But when something's wrong, you don't get to just look away from it. 15 minutes later, while I was showering, I had a horrifying realization. I had a wedding ring on my left hand. To describe the emotion it gave me would be nigh impossible. How would you have felt? You probably would have chalked it up to a prank, right? Started replaying things in your head, trying to maybe pinpoint when someone could have slipped it on your finger without you noticing. But you quickly have no choice but to dismiss it. As a prank, it's bad. As an explanation, it's even worse. Then your mind would have probably gone to the other extreme, and you would have thought of yourself as crazy. The latter's a lot harder to shake off. I stumbled out of the shower and looked at myself in the mirror. I was, obviously, still me. Tired. More so than usual. My eyes were weary. I hadn't shaved in a few days. Over the years, my skin had left its marks on me. Wrinkles. It's usually not that bad, but the dim bathroom probably made my reflection more depressing than it actually was. I stood like that. Observing. Calculating. I was leaning against the sink. It took me a bit to realize my arms were trembling. I suddenly felt weak. A fever? Unlikely. It felt like something was crawling in my thighs. The more I became aware of it, the further across my body it spread. The only thing giving company to my unsteady breathing was the water still dripping from the showerhead. It felt like a trance. At some point, I must have flat out stopped thinking and just stared. Have I somehow forgotten that I'm married? Ridiculous. Insane. But my shaking would not stop. Unable to find an explanation for the ring, I decided to look around my place. If I was married, then there should have been obvious signs that a woman was living there. Something. Anything. But the place looked just like it always had. No makeup. No female clothes. No photos. Nothing. For a brief moment, I felt somewhat relieved. But it wasn't enough. I had to be certain. I have no social media, so my only bet of gaining information was by trying to talk to my friends and family. I couldn't just flat out ask them, "Hey, do you know if I'm married?" Instead, I decided to send out a few text messages. Start a casual conversation, and then casually drop a mention of my wife. See how they would react. The response was devastating. People either ignored it or, much more often and much more horrifically, replied with, "Oh, yeah? How's Nancy? Who the fuck is Nancy?" I remember blurting out at some point. Obviously, that was the name of my wife. In fact, examining the wedding ring revealed an inscription that read, "From Nancy to Jay, may we always be together." Even though it was impossible, even though I had absolutely no memory of it, the truth was undeniable. I was married. And I had somehow completely forgotten it. I tried to think back to the last few days. The goal was to see if I had any major holes in my memory. If I have forgotten the person I was supposedly living with, then there must have been something glaring. But everything lined up. Every part of my memory fit quite neatly. Of course, I realized that, if I've been married for a while, whatever the issue is would have damaged my memory in a far more substantial and long-term way, and that trying to retrace my footsteps was not a trustworthy method to begin with. I flipped through my contacts. Sure enough, there was a single Nancy. I tried calling. Only dial tone, though. I had no photos on my phone. I was never one to keep any. Same for the computer. I was completely baffled. The next day, I paid Karen a visit, remembering it was a day off for her. Since I had no other way of gaining information indirectly, I probably did, but I was just too impatient. To tell the truth, I just flat out told her what my issue was. She was a nurse, so I figured she'd understand. The first thing she told me was that I should contact a doctor immediately. The second thing was that, if Nancy was really nowhere to be found, and I couldn't get in touch with her, and had no memory of where she might be, it'd be worthwhile to call the police. The police? What would they do? What would I even tell them? If Nancy actually existed, and I was her husband, and I walked up with this bizarre story of not remembering her, they sure as shit wouldn't accept it with open arms. Still, I kept that to myself and just nodded along. My real objective was to learn more about my wife. Karen explained that Nancy wasn't very talkative. Kept to herself. She didn't have a job. Something which, as far as Karen was able to tell me, I didn't mind. When I tried pressing for details, the answers were vague. I couldn't piece together the image of this mysterious woman. It already started to feel like I was getting nowhere. It was only when I asked when she'd moved in that things became even more troubling. "Oh, 2 years or so, I think," Karen told me. And, according to her, our wedding was as recent as last March. The revelations just kept piling on. Jesus. Am I missing 2 years of my life? That thought alone was enough to get me into a doctor's office that very same day. They agreed to do some tests. On my way back home, I bought a carbon monoxide detector. I'd read somewhere memory loss was a common symptom of the gas. Even though I knew it probably couldn't be on the scale I was experiencing, I had to be sure. My place turned out to be perfectly habitable. I think I can safely rule out poisoning in general at this point, since the doctor would have caught something on the blood tests, right? At the time, though, I was still unsure. So, I began rummaging through my apartment yet again, trying to find some sort of clue. Some sort of evidence that she was there. Nancy. Nancy. What kind of person is she? How had we met? What was the sound of her voice? How did she smell? What color were her eyes? What kind of hair did she have? Was she tall? Short? Had she been the first to say, "I love you"? What had our plans for the future been? Living together 2 years. You can't tell me it's all just gone. My earlier search must have not been as thorough as I figured. At the time, I probably should have realized the fundamental problem in my reasoning. Even if I had missed something, it didn't change the fact that my apartment had to have been arranged in such a way that it looked like she was never even there by someone. Thinking about it now, maybe I had realized it. Maybe I was just looking for something they'd overlooked. Either way, as I told you earlier, I turned the place upside down. As the night drew on, I grew more frustrated. The furniture that I hadn't just shoved over, I threw across the room. I don't think the neighbors got a wink of sleep that night. I know I didn't. By 4 a.m., I was just about ready to scream in agony. Had I really gone mad? Was my perception of what was real and what wasn't completely wrong? That apartment I was standing in, was it even mine? Was I who I claimed I was? Was any of it real? What if it was just a nightmare? It didn't make sense. I dropped to the floor. It had only been a few days, yet my body felt like it had withered. A mere shell of its former self. Something had been slowly sucking the life out of me. The seemingly undeniable confirmation of Nancy's very existence felt like a parasite slowly leeching on me. My throat felt dry. I want to crawl up and just try and hope that by the time sunlight peaked, I'd be freed. That some magical explanation would come through, and that I could go on with my life. Actually, maybe I wanted even less. Maybe I just wanted someone to confirm my version of reality. Just one person. Even if they were wrong. Even if they'd misunderstood the situation. Even if I had to go and make them believe Nancy really never existed. Just one person. That would have been enough for me. But above all, I think I just wanted to cry. But that's when I noticed that one of my floorboards was loose. In my desperation, I pried it open to reveal a sealed plastic bag. Inside of it was a knife. Its blade covered in blood. Dried. Judging by the dust, I'd say it had been there for a few days. I'd already given up on asking what it was doing there. Maybe because a part of me suspected the answer. Because the knife itself looked familiar. As it should have. It was part of my kitchen set. Karen stopped by the next day. Asked me about the noise. I dodged the question at first. I was fairly certain she was going to call the police. I finally blurted out that Nancy and I had gotten into an argument, and that she'd gone off to stay with her parents. My display from the day earlier was just having a mental break of some kind. I don't know if she was satisfied with that alone. But the cops still haven't knocked on my door, so I'm inclined to believe she was. Either way, I haven't spoken to her since. I called my mom. This time flat out asked her about Nancy and everything that had happened to me over the past few days. I begged, I hoped, that the joke would end there. Or that maybe my earlier test with dropping my wife in the text messages was a big misunderstanding, and that I was still sane, and still a bachelor. My mom said nothing, at first. Then. Good God. And you don't know where she is now? It's no joke. This is my reality. I'm married. And my wife is missing. And I have a bloody knife in my apartment. If my memory can't be trusted, could I have done something terrible and just not be aware of it? Every time I hear sirens in the distance, I shiver a bit. Every moment, it feels like someone's coming for me. And I'm holed up in a room with someone I trust the least right now, myself. There were quite a few occasions while writing this when I wanted to run outside and get someone to just watch me. And each time, that desire was snuffed out by the voice in the back of my head convincing me I am still of sound mind and that something else is going on here. A faint hope that it's the world that's turned against me and tricking me in hopes of driving me mad. As stupid as the thought is, It's oddly comforting. It's better than giving in to the feeling that you've been put in the passenger's seat of your own car. The driver? Your own shadow. Someone you feel like you've never met, but is undoubtedly there. It's better than the nightmares of waking up in my apartment, in complete darkness, stumbling about, slowly being choked by something. Really, at this point, I'm not even sure if those are dreams. Maybe whoever, whatever, has decided to do this to me is right here with me, cackling at how miserable I must look. Nancy. On some nights I want to tell myself that she was a ghost. That I could hear a woman whisper my name. That she's kind. That she loves me. That if I just reach out, she would grasp my hand and hold it until my heartbeat steadied. That this woman, this mysterious woman whom I had supposedly loved for 2 years, would give her husband comfort in a time like this. That she would understand. That she would try to tell me that whatever happened, it wasn't really my fault. But who would believe that? Who would believe this story? Would the police? Would a lawyer? Would a judge? Would a court-appointed psychologist? Maybe I'm asking for too much. How about we just start with you? You're clever, right? Do you believe me? No, actually, let me rephrase that. Do you believe that I believe this? Story 2, my family is cursed. I come from a long line of matriarchs. For some reason, we only give birth to girls. Generations and generations of women in my family. It's probably some weird genetic quirk, but my mother says it's part of the family curse. The curse dates back to my great-great-something grandmother. She come to Australia in the time of the gold rush with my great-great-something grandfather looking for a better life than they left behind. They found it, too. The gold rush was good to them both, and before they knew it they owned a small patch of land. Not much, really, but the Panning Creek went directly through the back of it. Soon, though, just after my great-great-something grandmother announced her first pregnancy, my great-great-something grandfather started gambling. And he was not good at it. One day, apparently, he lost her wedding ring in a bet. Old grandmama did not take this well. The story goes that she led him down into the creek and drowned him. Apparently everyone in town knew it was her, but there was not enough evidence to do much about it. Since then the women in my family have never been able to hold on to a man. They tend to marry young, fall pregnant, and then the husband will skip town. I put it down to poor life choices, personally, but my mother insists it's the curse. Granted, she is no better. My father left barely 3 months into the marriage, and has never tried to contact me. Nor do I particularly want him to. He sounds like a deadbeat, to be honest. Everyone in town tells me he was, like my great-great-something grandfather, a gambler, and not a good one. The funny thing is, though, that for all the supposed curse the family has, we have prospered. Great-great-something grandmother was a very shrewd woman, and once great-great-something grandfather was out of the way, she took what little money she had left and built it into a sizable savings. She built the house we live in to this very day. The creek still runs down the back of the property and everything. It's lovely down there, too. Technically, I am forbidden to go there, but Australia is a hot and dry place, and at the age of 12 I broke that rule. I was sure at the time that the curse did not exist, and at 12 was sure of my own intelligence and immortality. I remember it clearly, going down to the creek. I had decided the night before that ghost stories were for children, and since I was not a child, I was 12 for God's sake, I would go down to the creek the very next day. I waited all day for my mother to leave. And it was very hot, and very dry. The walk down there was pleasant enough. I remember the birds watching me. Australia has some lovely birds, very smart, too. It was the magpies I remember most, though. They have red eyes here, and they seemed particularly interested in my descent. They watched me closely as I made my way down the hill, following the small, winding path. It hadn't been walked for years, by the looks of things. The bush shrubs started to clear as I got closer to the water, and larger trees took their place. The crevice the stream passed through was cool and damp and green, and a very pleasant escape from the hot sun. It was beautiful. I have never, even to this day, seen such natural beauty. Without hesitation, I stripped down and jumped into the water. It came up to about waist height, and did not flow fast. I expected it to be cold, but instead found it almost at body temperature. It was delightful. A wave of calm came over me and I felt at peace, like no harm could come to me. Yet, somehow, not completely alone. The magpies were still watching me. Suddenly I became aware that no birds were singing. I married my childhood crush. He lived next door and I have known him almost my whole life. He was always a sweet boy. I remember he used to be so nervous around me, shyly smiling at me on the way to school. Of course, I was nervous around him too. Not long after I took that first swim I started to notice that my feelings for him were more intense than they were for any of my other friends. Suddenly, I found myself tongue-tied around him. We started dating at the age of 15. He was nothing but caring and supportive to me during that time. We would spend hours after school each day talking and he took great pains to ensure I was happy and thriving. Any trouble I faced it with him. It was no surprise he grew into a smart and kind young man. So when he proposed, I felt no fear in saying yes. I would make better life choice than the women who came before me. The engagement was short, and we had a small outdoors ceremony on the property. The magpies watched. The first year of our marriage was bliss. He continued to be a caring and supportive husband. We were a team. I was elated I fell pregnant. After I told him the news he began to change. Suddenly, he was staying later and later at work, often coming home smelling of beer. He stopped staying up talking to me. Soon, I found our joint bank account was draining. He was gambling. Online poker. When I confronted him about it he simply stormed off. He didn't even try to hide it. I went to my third ultrasound alone. It showed I was having a girl, and I knew what I had to do. That night he came home late, again, smelling of beer, again. I took him down the winding path, through the scrubs and the trees and into the creek. I cooed and welcomed him into the water with me, and once again felt at peace. I held him under the water until the last bubble burst. The magpies watched. Story 3, it was a different time. Johnny Raisin was poor as shit, and everybody knew it. He lived with his mom in a trailer on the scrapyard, rent-free, because their 3 mangy dogs kept the rats and kids away. They were hoarders of the worst sort, keeping everything that other people threw away. Stacked against the side of the trailer was a teetering wall of broken, one-wheeled bicycles and tricycles Johnny had collected over the years, streaked with rust and dog piss, like some half-completed Salvador Dali project. There was so much junk inside the trailer itself it was hard to move without knocking something over. Johnny's mom was 50 if she was a day, and she complained bitterly about the cold, staying wrapped in a massive woolen blanket that hooked and snagged on every metal object in their home. It smelled in there too, like old dog food and bug spray, but Johnny had a PlayStation 3 that mostly worked even though the case was held together with tape. I didn't, so I spent more time in that stinking, cluttered trailer than I might have otherwise. I wasn't using Johnny, I told myself. We'd been friends since kindergarten, and when the other kids picked on him, I always stood up for him. He was practically family. My parents let him come over and shower once a week and my mom would wash his threadbare clothes while Dad cooked him waffles with maple and bacon. Johnny was the brother I'd never had, and I knew that if anything happened to his mom, we'd have adopted him in an instant. The only reason why he didn't live with us permanently was that we didn't want to hurt his mom's feelings. She does the best she can, my mom said, her forehead crinkled with empathy. Losing her man hurt her deeper than any of us can imagine. So Johnny Raisin stayed living in the junkyard, and honestly, he liked it that way, because he had more freedom than any other kid his age. Johnny was always trying to make money at school by selling stuff to other kids. Not just his scrapyard treasures, he was an expert scavenger. He raided the lost property boxes at community halls and libraries, and walked around the streets with his head down, scanning for coins and dropped possessions. Most of what he found was garbage, but very occasionally he'd have a big win and sell something for $20. The rare times that happened, I'd know, because he'd promptly blow it all on candy and soda, making himself sick on all the luxuries he didn't often get. So when Johnny started showing up at school regularly with his backpack full of Milk Duds, Twinkies, Skittles and cans of Dr. Pepper, all for sale, I didn't know what to make of it. The other kids eagerly bought the contraband, since Johnny was asking a tenth of the retail price. They commented on the huge, old-school steel cans the soda came in, antiques from the 80s that Johnny had unearthed somewhere on his nocturnal roamings. I was wary of the long-expired products at first, but the food and drink tasted as good as if they'd been packaged last week, so I happily filled Johnny's pockets with coins too. The mystery deepened when Johnny started turning up in new clothes. Well, technically they weren't new at all, they were relics from several decades ago, just like the soda cans. But the colors were crisp and bright, and the fabric still had packaging creases and smelled of plastic wrappers. When I raised my eyebrows at his return of the Jedi t-shirt, Johnny just grinned at me and jingled the coin-filled pockets of his red Beat It era jacket. He looked like he'd stepped out of some old music video. Gonna go buy Fallout, New Vegas after school, he said, jerking a thumb in the direction of the mall. Wanna come? You know I do, I told him, shouldering my backpack. As we walked, Johnny whistled weirdly tuneless elevator music and checked his watch, also in theme, some decades-old Swatch model. I knew that he was playing it up on purpose. He knew I was desperate to find out where he'd been getting all this stuff, but I was damned if I was going to crack first and say anything. So, I've been exploring Emmett's Mall, down by the lake, he said finally, breaking a full 10 minutes of silence. Jesus, Johnny. That's where you've been getting all this stuff from? Yup. But that place has been abandoned forever. There's nothing left in there. Johnny just kept on grinning, giving me sidelong glances from beneath the brim of his vintage Lakers baseball cap, while I processed this information. Emmett's Mall had been the place to be, once upon a time. Back in the 70s, it had been the hub of the town, according to my mom. Kids would play ball in the park by the lake while parents shopped at their leisure, transported between the two mezzanine floors by fancy new escalators of shiny chrome and steel. A massive underground parking lot meant finding a spot for your car was never a problem, and it had every kind of store you could think of, stocking the latest luxuries of the time. But it wasn't to last. Everyone knew the story. One Monday morning in 1980, some kid's body had been found on the first-floor mezzanine. A security guard was convicted of murdering the teenager, smashing the boy's face in with a blunt object, then fleeing the scene. If you listen to my mom, the case against him seemed a bit light, but a black guy on minimum wage night shift probably didn't get a very good lawyer. And nobody knew who the boy was. His teeth and jaw were pieced back together, but they didn't match any known dental records. In that typical, 1980s kind of way, everyone just tried to ignore that it had happened at first, to pretend that it was all erased by the guilty verdict. I guess it was a different time. But then the store owners started reporting poltergeist activity, disembodied footsteps, whispers, stock moving by itself. When word got out that people were seeing ghosts, the popularity of the mall began to wane. Eventually, they shut up shop, store by store, until the mall was derelict, and in the summer of 1981, the doors were padlocked permanently shut. 30 years later, Emmett's Mall still squatted beside the lake, too expensive to demolish, and too haunted to sell. Even the homeless folk avoided it, finding other places to hunker down for the night. There were plenty of other places without such dark histories. It's kind of a secret, Johnny told me. Can you keep a secret? I nodded fervently. You know I can. All right. Sneak out tonight around 10:30, meet me by the mall. Bring a flashlight and your backpack. You'll need both. Okay. We didn't talk about it anymore after that, absorbed as we were playing the new game Johnny bought. By the time I went home for dinner, I'd nearly forgotten the little prickle of fear I'd felt when he offered to show me the secret of Emmett's Mall. It was a 20-minute walk to the mall from my house, and I'd left late, because I'd had to wait for my dad to go to bed before I could sneak out. As soon as I got to the patch of weeds that had nearly reclaimed the cracked asphalt leading up to the mall, Johnny called out to me, his flashlight pointed down, a puddle of light at his feet. "Come on man, or we'll be late." I wondered how exactly we could be late for something that hadn't changed for 3 decades, but I hitched my empty backpack and hurried after him as he pushed through the tall grasses that grew high around the perimeter of the mall. The steel roller doors were still pulled down over the main entrance and sported rusted padlocks, but someone had kicked in the side of the corrugated metal, bending it in just enough for a person to climb through. "This is how we get in," Johnny said, throwing his backpack through the hole, then clambering in after it. I shelved my doubts and followed quickly, finding myself standing in a foyer littered with broken glass and drifts of dirty plastic sheeting. "Come on," Johnny called, his sneakers crunching across the glass as he led the way out into the mall concourse. Empty stores gaped, dark and cavernous, alarming shadows moving inside them as our flashlights swept past. There was some sort of food court up ahead, or at least the remains of one. A few broken tables and plastic chairs were scattered about, flanked by tiled planters of overgrown ferns, forming a little indoor forest. Water pooled deep in one corner, and Johnny splashed through the shallows to reach the derelict escalator up to the first floor. His feet stirred up a green smell, rotting vegetation. "Whole basement is flooded now," Johnny said as we climbed the ancient metal stairs. "Lake must have busted in and filled it all up. There's even fish in there, if you're brave enough to go down." I shivered. I'd never been good with enclosed spaces or deep, dark water. I sure as shit wasn't going to go anywhere that combined both. When we reached the mezzanine, he checked his watch, then flashed his teeth in a smile and nodded right on time. "What happens now? SHH. Just listen and watch, okay? You'll see soon enough." We stood in silence for a minute or so, my ears straining for the slightest hint of sound. At first, I could only hear the occasional drip of water below us, in the flooded section of the food court. But as I listened, another sound began to faintly intrude, drifting on the silence of the empty mall. Old elevator music. It was distant and eerie, tinny and thin, and distorted like it was echoing off objects that were no longer there. Chilly fear turned my throat sour, and the beam of my flashlight began to tremble, until Johnny put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, man. I've done this dozens of times. Chill." Faint phosphorescence began to prick the corners of my vision and the music grew perceptibly louder, and more real. Between one blink and the next, I realized that the gaping storefronts around us were no longer empty sockets of darkness. Instead, a faint grey-white light dusted everything, showing us a sort of ghostly after-image of what had once been inside this place. "Holy shit," I murmured. Johnny laughed softly. "Yeah. Pretty fucking creepy, right? It always happens just after 11:11 p.m., like clockwork." Grabbing my arm, he hustled me along the cracked tiles of the mezzanine, making for the scratchy glow from one particular store. This one was Shirley's Candies. Squinting where Johnny pointed, I could see the eerie pale cursive of a neon sign scrawling itself across a window that didn't exist, spelling out its name. My mom told me about it. She used to love the milkshakes from this place. The music was louder here, real enough that my prickling ears could almost pinpoint the position of the invisible speakers it was coming from. Inside the candy store, the scratchy, faded white lines of shelves were superimposed over the rotten carpet and humps of broken, waterlogged ceiling tiles, like scrapes on the negative of a photograph. "Okay, so watch me," Johnny said, scanning the ethereal grid of ghostly shelves. "You gotta wait until the music sorta peaks. Then you can grab stuff." His hand poised over one of the intangible shelves. We listened as the music ebbed and flowed. Suddenly, it surged and swelled, as though piped directly into our ears from another era. Johnny swiped at shelves that now seemed less after-image, and more a double exposure, one reality layered over the top of another. With a whoop, he held up a very real box of Charleston shoes, and as the music faded away again, he stuffed the box into his backpack. "You never know quite what you're gonna get," he told me, walking down the lattice of ghostly aisles, "but that's half the fun." For the next 2 hours we moved from store to store, pilfering random goods from another time, until the music finally receded completely into the dark, replaced with the echoing silence of the abandoned mall. I thought about them all a lot over the next few days, wondering if what I'd experienced had been some weird fever dream or hallucination. But the boxes of expired candy under my bed and the gleaming new Atari 2600 beside my TV told a different story, one I was still struggling to believe. We went back again, nearly a week later, the unearthly, ancient music haunting us as our hands groped for forgotten treasures in those strange small hours when two different worlds seemed to cross over. This time was easier at first. My lingering fear of the unknown had all but worn off, until Johnny suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me down to the ground, hissing a warning. "What?" I whispered, feeling my pulse ramp up as I crouched on the rotten linoleum. Putting a finger to his lips, Johnny shook his head, then pointed through the smeared phosphorescence of the shelves in front of us. On the other side, a figure moved. Like the shelves, it was grayish-white and featureless, but certainly humanoid. And somehow deeply, deeply threatening. My vision stuttered, my bladder clenched suddenly, and the urge to piss nearly overwhelmed me. As the creature moved toward us, Johnny kept his hand in a fistful of my hoodie sleeve, pulling me right through the insubstantial shelves and out onto the mezzanine, where he ducked into another shop. He looked like I felt, his eyes wild and his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What the fuck was that?" I choked, my voice strangled in my throat. I'd never been so afraid in my life, and I had no idea why. "Ghost," Johnny panted, "you gotta watch out for them. They come after you sometimes, chase you if they see you." "Jesus fuck, Johnny. You never said shit about ghosts." He spat into the darkness. "Well, it's a fucking haunted mall, isn't it? What the hell did you think would be here, Lewis? Why do you think everyone up and left in the first place?" I swallowed my own sour saliva, not wanting to think too much about what had just happened. "What do they do if they catch you?" "I dunno, I've never been caught. Maybe they pull you into the ghost world. Maybe they steal your life to make themselves real. I'm not a fucking ghost expert, I just know, in my gut, that if they catch you something bad will happen." "You felt that, right? You can feel the bad all around them, like death coming for you." The music was fading away now. It was almost 1:11 a.m., the time when the ghostly mall closed. Heading for the foyer, I shook my head, shouldering my loot-filled backpack. "Well, in that case I'm not coming back here ever again. It's not worth it for some old candy and ancient video games." Johnny said nothing as he climbed after me through the hole in the steel door. I wondered how many times he'd been here, and how many times he'd almost been caught. I wondered why he didn't just stop. Worried me every time Johnny turned up with a bag full of mall contraband to sell at school. He had an eBay account now, after buying his first laptop, and was starting to see some real profits from selling mint vintage goods to actual collectors. I tried to tell myself that he knew the risks, but the fact was he didn't know the risks. We had no idea what would happen if he got caught by the ghosts of Emmett's Mall, and I felt like the world's shittiest friend for letting him put himself at risk like that. I'd always been Johnny's defender. Everyone knew it, that if they fucked with little scrawny Johnny Raisin, then Louis Belmont, the tall, fast kid, would come and beat your ass for messing with his friend. Now he was facing something so much worse than kindergarten bullies, and even if he was doing it out of choice just because he wanted the money, I felt like crap for not being there for him when he needed me. When Johnny turned up one day with a big bruise on the side of his face and welt on his hand, I knew exactly what had happened. I fell, he tried to tell me. "Like hell you did." He gave me his lopsided grin and shrugged. "Well, they didn't catch me. I got away. Not without getting fucked up. I'm okay. You're not okay. You need to stop, Johnny." His grin stuttered and faded, and I heard the receding mall music in my memory as his smile deserted him. I can't, Louis. I blew out a long breath. "Fine. If you need to keep going back to that place, I'm coming with you. At the very least I can be your lookout, so the spooks don't get you." I thought about how weird it was, that we were talking so casually about otherworldly spirits, as if they were just mall security that we needed to dodge while shoplifting. "It was more fun with you there, anyway," Johnny said, forcing lightness back into his voice. I tried to do the same. Well, I guess that settles it then. They seemed more vigilant now, the unnatural denizens of Emmett's Mall, aware of us somehow, as though we'd been seen pilfering from their world and word had spread. I wondered if we'd outstayed our welcome, but Johnny was convinced everything was still okay. Whether that was just his greed talking or whatever else was driving him, I wasn't sure, but with my baseball bat tucked under my arm I felt less scared of the spirits that haunted this place. I figured if they could hit Johnny, maybe I could hit them back. We did all right for a while there, staying out of trouble. It was a big mall, and 2 hours seemed like a short enough time not to get caught. There had been a couple of close calls. Johnny couldn't run as fast as I could, but we knew the place well enough now that we could always find somewhere to hide. Then it all came crashing down on us. We'd been switching the days we went to the mall, as if it would confuse the ghosts, assuming they thought like we did. This time it was a Sunday. I'd been on guard at the top of the escalators when I heard pelting sneakers, then Johnny calling out to me, true alarm in his voice. Clutching one strap of his backpack, he was running as fast as he could along the top mezzanine, his stupid Michael Jackson jacket jingling as he ran. But the ghost was faster. It loped along behind him, all silvery white limbs and rangy pale body, bearing down on him even as I ran to help, my baseball bat primed to swing. And then it caught him, and everything turned red. Blood spattered the mildewed tiles, bright at first, then darker and darker, as the ghostly thing smashed Johnny's head to a pulp. I remember every detail vividly, watching my friend's skull cave in with each impact from that blurry, grey-white arm, the limb too long, a streaky smear rising and falling. I felt like I was running through invisible barriers, distortions in the musty air, too slow. The bat swung hard in my hands, connecting with something solid, knocking the ghost away, and out of our world, but far too late. For just a moment, the wreckage of Johnny's ruined skull gaped up at me, all glistening brain and bright bone where my friend's face had been. Then he flickered out of existence, just as the mall music ebbed away. Even as I raged and sobbed and paced, hunting up and down, waiting for the music to swell again, I already knew Johnny was gone forever. There had always been something nagging at me about this place. It was more than just a ghost mall. The things we'd been stealing had been too real, too genuine and new. But that was a secondary concern. I knew that finding out her son was dead would quite literally be the end of Johnny's mum. I got no sleep that night, nor the next. I begged off school with a migraine and sat on my computer, looking up anything I could about Emmett's Mall and finding nothing. Eventually I emailed the local newspaper, asking if they had any of the old articles on file, and they obliged, sending me the original scanned article about the body. When I read the description of the battered corpse, all my fears were confirmed. Boy aged between 13 to 15 wearing a red jacket, a Lakers cap and new Levi jeans. The original body that had started it all, the body that had cursed them all in the first place, had been the body of my best friend, Johnny Raisin. We hadn't been stealing from a ghost mall at all. We were the ghosts, shoplifting goods from the past, making the people who owned the stores think the place was haunted. I was so stupid, I should have been able to figure it out. Worst of all, I'd failed Johnny. I'd failed his mom too, and there was no fucking way I was ever going to tell her how he died. The article contained the name of the security guard who had been charged with the murder of the unidentified boy, and I looked him up immediately. He'd been sentenced to life in a maximum security prison, where he died several years later, killed by another inmate. The man had always protested his innocence, but I knew what had happened. I'd seen Johnny's death with my own eyes, and it was certainly murder. But with the man dead already, there could be no justice for Johnny. No way I could pay him back for what he'd done. I eyed the baseball bat propped against my desk, remembering how solid Johnny's attacker had felt in that moment, how tangible the impact when I'd managed to knock him away. Maybe there was a way to get payback after all. While the police hunted for Johnny Raisin, missing for a week now, I hunted for his killer. Every night I went to the mall, waiting for the ghost. Sometimes I saw it, waving the pale smear of its long arm like it was taunting me, then it would vanish. Sometimes it ran from me and I'd give chase, ready to pay it back for all it had done to my friend. It was elusive, as if it knew I was hunting it. Sometimes it disappeared from one spot, then reappeared on the other side of the mall almost before it had faded from in front of me, almost as if there were two versions of it. It became my mission, the focus for my grief. I managed to clip it with a pretty good swing one night, but it vanished again, and I stood and howled with rage, shaking my bat at the ceiling and swearing I would fucking kill the damn thing. And then it eventually happened, exactly as it should have. I could tell the ghost had its back to me, and I ran, right as the music peaked, echoing through the abandoned mall. Hearing me, it turned, then fled along the mezzanine. Yelling incoherently, I chased it down, putting everything into my long strides. I was faster than it was, and as it stumbled, my bat came down on its head. Silver sparks exploded from it as it went down, and screaming with triumph, I struck it again and again, until brilliant silver pooled around what had been its skull. Too late, I saw another ghost approaching, charging straight for me, and then a powerful blow smashed straight into my jaw, knocking me sideways. As I lay on the filthy floor, the world stuttered and flickered for a moment, like a slipped film. And I saw red. A red jacket, a Lakers cap, a mangled skull, and an achingly familiar boy standing over us, holding a baseball bat. It's been 8 years since I murdered Johnny. 8 years since I discovered that there were never any ghosts in that mall. Just echoes of ourselves, all tangled up in a big mess of temporal spaghetti, until none of it made sense anymore. Johnny's mom died a year after his disappearance. I arranged for her to be buried near the John Doe of Emmett Small, so she could still be near her boy. There's no way I can forgive myself for any of this, no way to atone for it. Emmett Small still sits there, slowly rotting away, tempting me with its quantum mysteries, telling me I can go back and stop myself from killing Johnny, that I can fix everything. But time doesn't work that way. What's happened has happened, there can be no paradox, no change. Johnny's life was a perfect loop, and I was the hand that spliced it into shape. Maybe one day I'll be rich enough to buy that time-forsaken mall and smash it into the dirt, but for now I still have too many demons to deal with. Until then, I urge all of you, just stay the fuck away from Emmett's Mall. Story 4, The Sunburn. It never really hurt, you know? The sunburn, I mean. People always told me about the sharp heat that radiated from their burns, the stinging pains, and the dull aches. I never felt that pain though, and I never understood why people hated them so much. I loved sunburns. As a kid I would just lay in the sun, waiting for my skin to redden and raise in the afternoon sun. The heat that radiated from them was almost euphoric. It would come from the very edges of my skin, and slowly seep down to the core of my body, warming me up in my entirety, regardless of how cold I was. It was like a loving embrace from within your own skin. The skin too, it was my favorite part. The way it would slowly change color like it was trying to mirror the sun's light, only to fall off at the slightest touch. I loved peeling back those pale white flakes. I'd sometimes challenge myself to see just how long of a strip I could pull off. Not many people liked when I did that though. They'd call me disgusting, and a freak whenever I would do it, so I started wearing shirts with sleeves. If they couldn't see the strips, they can't get mad at me, right? Then they just made fun of how I looked, so I smiled and laughed with them. I hoped if I acted like them, maybe they would leave me alone. And it worked, for a while. While I was with others I would laugh and pretend at being like them, always feeling the warm call of the sun under my clothes. As soon as I was done with that facade, I would immediately find a nice, open clearing and strip. I'd take my clothes off and bask in the heat, pulling away at my shedding skin as it peeled. It was therapeutic. It was during one of these relaxation sessions that I saw it. Beside me in the grass, hanging from a small raised plant, was a cocoon. It basked in our shared rays, and I'm sure whatever was inside of it felt the warmth of the sun from inside their pale shell. Watching it, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who basked in the sun's rays, gaining comfort from the burns on my skin. It became a habit. Every day, after I was done living a lie, I would come back to that clearing and bask beside my new friend. We would share the sun's rays as its shell became paler, and my skin became redder. For over a week I did this, and after a week, I watched the most beautiful metamorphosis happen. Emerging from a pale and flaky white corpse, was a creature of beauty. Color danced off of its wings as it tested its own body. It learned to be comfortable in the new body of a butterfly, a form nobody could call disgusting. I felt a moment of envy, looking at the creature's old shell, dead and flaking away. Then I felt lonely, realizing that I was the only one left who was disgusting. And then a light went off in my head. I just didn't bask long enough. I could be beautiful too, I just had to wait like the butterfly did. Stay in the sun until it blessed me like that. And so I did. I stayed there until the sun set, and watched the sun rise. I felt the skin peel and raise, as blisters formed and eventually popped. Days went by as I felt wiggling inside of the new holes in my body, but I didn't pay it heed. I just had to be patient. It was a little over a week when they found me. I still basked in the sun, because I knew it was almost done. I was glad to have someone with me, actually. Someone would get to witness my metamorphosis like I witnessed the butterfly. They screamed and vomited, but I'm sure the beauty was just too much for them to handle. It was almost too much for me even. When they lifted my shell onto the stretcher though, I caught a glimpse. Beneath the rotting and burnt skin, and beneath the writing mass of insects feeding off my shell, was a deep porcelain white. The true color of my beauty was coming through, I just couldn't wait to be finished. Even after all this time, there wasn't a single burning sensation. There was just the warm embrace, and I had to thank the sunburn for peeling away my shell. Story 5, Welcome to the facility. Before I start talking about my job, I wanted to go on record that I by no means condone the activities of the facility at which I work, although I do believe that they are necessary for the survival of the human race in general. When most of you hear the words underground and unethical, I imagine your mind probably jumps to thoughts of physical torture a la Guantanamo Bay, but I promise you that what we do is far more sophisticated and refined than jerry-rigging a man's balls to a car battery. The facility I work at predominantly deals with the effects of prolonged psychological discomfort and sensory deprivation in order to see the kinds of conditions that the human psyche can survive in. For this reason, we generally work with very young children that have been raised within the facility itself, so that we can get clear readings with as few variables as possible. During my first 6 months of employment, I worked at what was known as Room CO4, the Silent Night Chamber. We use numbers and these cute, euphemistic names to minimize the impact on the researchers' psyches and to distance them from their subjects. The Silent Night Chamber is an anechoic chamber, which is a fancy scientific way of saying an entirely soundproofed room. Naturally, we keep the lights on for observation purposes and use one-way mirrors so that we can see the subject without them seeing us. The main purpose of the experiments in these chambers was to determine whether human beings could become acclimatized to a fully soundproofed room and thus whether soundproofed bunkers could be a viable option in the event of invasion. For the first 3 months, we had subject Alpha 88 enter the chamber for increasing lengths of time and followed up with interviews to examine the subject's psychological state after exposure. Spending between 5 to 10 minutes in the chamber appeared to have little impact on the subject, so we quickly made the decision to increase the time substantially. After 20 minutes in the chamber, the subject described being able to hear their own heartbeat and the gurgling of their stomach, which they found particularly disconcerting. They appeared to be reluctant to re-enter the chamber, and had to be sedated to make them more compliant. By the middle of the 2nd month, we made the executive decision to extend time in the chamber to 30 minutes. When we reached the 30-minute mark, researchers noted that the subject was begging to be let out and appeared to be physically unstable. From then on, we advised the subject to sit down in the chamber, to prevent any unfortunate accidents. While the subject never fully acclimatized to 30 minutes within the chamber, it was agreed towards the start of the 3rd month that time in the chamber would be increased to the final goal of 1 hour. During the first session, The subject became visibly distressed by the 35-minute mark and began trembling violently. By the 50-minute mark, the subject had voided their bowels out of panic and was talking incessantly to themselves. When asked in the follow-up interview why they had started talking to themselves, the subject responded that they couldn't stand the silence, but that the sound of their own voice didn't seem real and actually ended up terrifying them. We managed another 2 more sessions before the incident. We make sure that all of the cutlery our subjects use is made of plastic, but this still wasn't enough to deter Alpha 88 from shoving the handle of their plastic fork so far down their ear that they had already burst their right eardrum before we managed to reach them. Since the subject was no longer of any use to us, a long discussion was had about whether they should be transferred to another department, but it was finally decided that they should be sent to the pasture. The pasture takes up the entire top level of the facility and is directly below ground level, which means it is the only level that has an influx of natural light. Subjects in the pasture are allowed into a room flooded with natural light for 4 hours per day and are able to interact with one another. They are given access to a variety of toys, a television that they can use to watch films or play video games, and round-the-clock access to snacks. Unlike subjects in lower parts of the facility, subjects in the pasture are given home-cooked meals 3 times per day. Each subject is permitted 1 month in the pasture before they are terminated. Their bodies are either taken care of by the waste disposal team or reprocessed for use in Sector F19, Golding Island. I knew one of the researchers who worked on Golding Island and they'd already made a few major breakthroughs. Their work revolved around 2 subjects, Delta 23 and Delta 47, who were both starved for a week before the experiment began. Subject Delta 23 was made aware immediately that the food offered to him was human flesh, while Delta 47 would only be told after lengthy consumption to register the psychological impact on the subject. Delta 47 unsurprisingly started eating the meat within minutes of it being offered, but it took Delta 23 upwards of 2 hours before they finally succumbed. As of the time of writing, it has been over a month and Delta 47 still hasn't been told the true nature of the mystery meat. The data collected from these 2 subjects will go a long way when it comes to Golding Island's research on the least psychologically damaging way to approach cannibalism in a crisis. After overseeing the installment of Alpha 88's replacement at the Silent Night Chamber, I was transferred to the surveillance unit of Level E, Neverland Valley. As its name suggests, Neverland Valley takes up its own level in the facility and is arguably one of the most important departments in the entire complex. There are currently 90 subjects living in Neverland Valley and they are separated into 3 subgroups of 30. Subjects in Subgroup 1 were raised solely with other children, Subgroup 2 experienced interaction with nurses until the age of 5, then were deprived of any human interaction, and Subgroup 3 have experienced no significant human interaction in their entire life. The significance of the human social experience is integral to determining how well we will survive if we are reduced to smaller numbers or whether isolated individuals will be able to cope in protected bunkers. My assignment was to observe subjects in Subgroup 1 and record any significant findings. From speaking with my colleagues, it seems as though, despite occasional disagreements, Subgroup 3 appears to be the most successful in terms of overall happiness among the subjects, while subjects in Subgroup 2 are the most prone to developing mental health disorders such as paranoia, multiple personality disorder, anxiety, and depression. Subjects in Subgroup 1 have naturally become acclimated to being completely alone, which is a great advantage, but tragically they have not had the opportunity to develop language skills and their cognitive development has been severely stunted. For the most part, they rarely make noise and spend most of their time quietly playing with the toys in their respective rooms. It was during my surveillance of Subgroup 1 that I made my big discovery, so to speak. After the first month had passed, I started to notice there was something special about the subject in room E1-213, Beta 22. It wasn't until I zoomed in on their image that I realized quite why I felt as though I recognized them. They were the spitting image of my own 7-year-old son. Same face, same hair, approximately the same height, give or take their somewhat stunted growth. It was too uncanny to be mere coincidence. That's when I came up with my theory. I had often wondered how the facility acquired so many young children without the media noticing. Only a few privileged researchers were allowed to know the truth, and access to level H, the closet, the lowest level in the facility and the place where the subjects came from, was far above my security clearance. From what I have surmised, they've been harvesting DNA from the maternity wards at hospitals across the county and using it to create their own clones of people's children. That way, the children are born, live, and die in the facility with no one being any the wiser. It may sound hypocritical, after all of the terrible things I've put these subjects through, but I cannot watch my son like that. I know he is not really my son, but he is no longer a subject to me. He is a child. They're all children, and I have to help them. Story 6, the reason I won't go near my paintings anymore. My career as a painter is over, and the fact I can no longer enjoy my love of art is strangling my soul with a horrific strength too terrifying and powerful to name. I don't know if I can handle it much longer, but let me explain myself. Decades ago, when I was in first grade, I drew my first real picture. A crude crayon drawing with a pair of stick men in front of a forest background. It wasn't good, but my 7-year-old self was proud of it, deciding to show my attempted masterpiece to the teacher. I don't remember much from my early childhood, but the sight of the teacher's face contorting in confusion lurks in my memory to this day. "What is that?" she asked, staring at the paper with her jaw open. "It's a picture of two people at the woods," I said in a childish babble, not knowing what was wrong. "No, what is that?" the teacher said, shoving the drawing near my face with her finger in the left-hand corner. In the corner of my picture, in grey crayon, something was perched in the tree with a smile full of fangs. It was a lanky creature, its waxy texture making its skin look rough and bumpy. But most strange of all its characteristics, it had small, tiny eyes. Smaller than the tip of an ant's leg. And with those itty-bitty eyes, it appeared to stare at the stick figures in the drawing. I was bewildered to say the least. Disturbed would be a better word. "What is it?" the teacher pressed. "I don't know. I didn't even draw that." The teacher looked at the other students as they finished up their artworks, and she ruled the possibility somebody had been messing with my paper. "Don't lie to me. Tell me what you drew." "I didn't draw it, I swear. I don't even have a grey crayon." "No more lies. What is it?" I stroked my hair and thought for an excuse, saying, "It's a dragon, I guess." The thing that had appeared on my drawing didn't have wings, looking nothing like a dragon, but the teacher bought it and didn't write it off as something weird. After school, I threw that first picture in the trash. Throughout my life, I developed an immense passion for art, but that thing showed up every single time I drew anything. I made a birthday card for my grandmother, drawing a flowery meadow. It wasn't until the next day, however, until my grandmother called, asking why I'd sent her a picture of a grey, slender beast with minuscule eyes. My elementary school art instructor thought I was obsessed with whatever I was drawing, and I had to lie about the creature being a Pokemon character. There were a million little things like that, and it became a regular part of my life, something utterly normal to me. After all, it started in first grade. On Valentine's Day in 5th grade, I decided to sketch my crush to impress her, and I covered the entire sheet with her face to make sure the thing wouldn't ruin the picture. If there's no background for the thing to show up in, it will be a perfect sketch. My plan, contradicting what I had hypothesized, failed without a doubt. Instead of appearing in the background of the picture, the thing was climbing out a bloody gash where the drawing of my crush's right cheek had been. As you can guess, I didn't show it to her and left school with a blank, numb, and unreadable expression. And from then onward, I never failed to see the thing in my artwork, whether it be peering through the window in a cityscape, swimming over the horizon of a seascape, or staring at me in the center of the page with its black, diminutive eyes. When I started using watercolor and pastels more than pencils, I got more chances to see the thing in much greater detail. It was a ghoul the color of a dark gray storm cloud, with yellowy, curly nails and a surreal chin as pointy as a knife sometimes. after looking away from the picture for a few seconds, the thing would change its spot, freaking me out. Has it ever done that before? I asked the first time it happened. I thought the thing was more sinister the older I got, but it had never done anything. Of course, I was assuming the thing was a single entity that lived in my artwork. At least, that's what I've come to believe after all these years. After I graduated from art school, a place where the thing haunted the backgrounds of all my works, I opened a studio in Lower Manhattan. I whipped up some watercolors and sketches for the display, creating distant environments for the thing to dwell without anybody noticing, and after a few weeks, there were quite a few buyers. In no time at all, I made a name for myself in the local artistic community, the creepy Easter eggs in my drawings scenery intriguing some of my buyers. Life was going great, and the money wasn't bad at all. Only a tiny portion of my buyers noticed how the creepy Easter egg in the background scenery would move a few centimeters, and I informed them how it was an optical illusion I'd been working on perfecting my entire life. A few weeks ago, after another successful day of business, I decided to make a clay sculpture in my spare time. I'd never done it before, so I thought it'd be interesting. I bought some clay, headed home through the New York traffic, and let my hypnotic creativity take control of my fingers. It was like drawing a picture, but the squishy clay felt better on my skin than a pencil or brush. I ended up making the head of a bird, chiseling the animal's feathery, wavy neck before adding the beak. I was impressed with myself, leaving the creation on my nightstand to dry overnight. As I drifted to sleep, a noise found my ears, but I don't remember how to describe it. And as soon as my consciousness faded into suspension and my subconscious took control of my mind, I had a dream. I was in a desert, dust devils and tornadoes of dirt and sand raging in the distance, but wisping in circles around me was a billow of grey paint. I swear the black, minute eyes of the thing contacted mine as the nightmare jolted me awake. I woke with my body facing the nightstand, and I would have screamed if I thought my nightmare had ended. Instead of being the head of a bird, the sculpture had a triangular chin, a coat of grey paint, and two needle-sized holes as eyes. I didn't move, only the sculpture did. It smiled at me and bounded off the nightstand without breaking, clinking out of my bedroom. That adrenaline rush was the most I'd ever gotten. I had so much energy, but was frozen still, thinking my heart would burst with enormous, horrible pressure. What the hell had happened? I spasmed as a downstairs window shattered, not daring to think. I stayed up all night under my blankets, me spending hours upon hours of my eyes stuck open. Torture, I thought. I'm torturing myself. But I wouldn't fall asleep while that thing was still out there. I couldn't fall asleep while it was roaming about. In the morning, when I came to my senses, I clambered downstairs to find the windows scattered across the sidewalk. What the hell did I do? I went outside, looked around the street for a minute, and cleaned up the glass until the newspaper boy arrived, asking about my window. Oh, it's, just nothing. Oh, well, accidents happen. Anyway, did you hear what happened last night? The boy said, flailing the newspaper in my face. Someone broke into a 3D printer store and made a whole load of these weird statues. They're creepy, with odd chins and these eyes. Those eyes. I patted the newspaper boy in the back and spent the laborious task of driving to the studio in downtown. When I got there, something had broken the door open, and I saw the thing was taking up all the space in all the paintings. And sitting on my desk was a paper note with the words "Thank you." After seeing that, I destroyed all the drawings in the studio and haven't dared to make one since. Some of my old buyers have gone missing, and as you can imagine, I refused to attend a party hosted by the New York Art League, which I knew possessed one of my paintings. My career is gone, I'm broke, and I have no clue what to do. The only thing I've learned since the end of my job is to put a dresser against my bedroom door at night. The only reason I'm writing this is to see if anyone else has something lurking everywhere in an aspect of their life, a thing that feeds on your happiness and stops you from doing what you love. Because I have no idea if I can deal with this for much more time. Story 7, Flowers. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. My husband, let's call him Ray, works for a 3-letter government agency. He doesn't talk about what he does much, but his reading library makes me think it has something to do with chemical attacks. He is a very funny, passionate man who loves his country more than anything. 1 week ago, while out to dinner with our son, he received a phone call. I noticed the color empty his face, followed by the words "Roger, sir. I've got to go, baby." This isn't the first time I've heard these words come out of his mouth during a family outing. His job requires multiple drills to test his readiness. This one was different. It felt real. We left our dinner quickly and I dropped him off at the airport. "I love you, baby. I'll be back soon." Those would be the last words he said to me for 3 days. On the 4th day, I woke up to the laughter of my son and the smell of bacon. I quickly jumped out of bed and ran down the stairs. There, in the kitchen, stood my husband. "When did you get back?" I cried. "Just now, my love." As I hugged him, I noticed a familiar scent. He smelled like geraniums. I only know this because my grandmother had several species in her garden. "Why do you smell like flowers?" I asked, knowing he wouldn't know what the hell a geranium was. "That's odd, I haven't showered in days." He giggled. Our day continued on just like it always does. Filled with copious amounts of outside play and Netflix binging during our son's nap time. As we were watching our 5th episode of Oitenb, I asked my husband how his trip was. "Training bullshit as usual," he said, clearly annoyed. As he looked at me to shoot his crooked smile, I noticed his eyes. He has blue eyes, that are typically bloodshot due to lack of sleep. Today, they were different. His pupils were the size of a pinpoint and the white of his eyes had a yellow tinge. I didn't think anything of it, and slowly drifted off to sleep on his shoulder. I was gently woken up with a small tap on the nose. "Mommy, wake up," my son said with a cute smile. "Where's Daddy?" I asked him. He responded with a shrug and ran to his Legos. My husband loves to tinker in the garage. I made the trip down the hallway to the laundry room, which leads to the garage door. The closer I got to the door, the stronger the smell of geraniums. I quietly opened the door, ensuring I didn't startle him. The light from the laundry room slowly filled the black garage, eventually illuminating my husband. He was kneeling in the center of the room staring directly at the door. His breathing was labored and he was drenched in sweat. I go to flip the light on, only for it to short out. The door automatically shuts as I run to the kitchen to grab a flashlight. I hurry back to the garage door and fling it open. The light is now back on. My husband is going through his old military equipment, seemingly fine. "What the fuck is going on?" I yell. "What do you mean, baby?" he says as he peeks his head over the boxes. "I walked in here 2 seconds ago and it was black and you were on the ground. What are you doing? Where is my Blackfoot box?" he asks with his face in a large green bag. "Ray, answer my question. What were you doing?" "Babe, I don't have time for this bullshit. Where is the fucking box?" he says through his teeth. At this point, I'm horrified. I point to the top of shelf where it sits in plain sight. He grabs it, moves me out of the way, and runs up to his office. I hear the door slam and the deadbolt lock. The whole night goes by. I don't hear a peep from him. His phone is in the kitchen, so I can't even call him. Finally, at 6 a.m. on the 5th day, I hear the door open. I hear a run to the bathroom, followed by the sound of him vomiting. I decide that before I go check on him, that I'm going into his office. I sneak past the bathroom and slowly move into the room. The room is spotless. The only item that I saw was a silver wrapper that said Acna. The sound of Ray vomiting intensified. I open the door of the bathroom to find him hugging the toilet and expelling a bright yellow liquid as he heaved. In my phone, there is a number. It starts with a 0, he said while he gasped for air. "Call them and say Ronin Charlie 3. His eyes closed and he started having the most violent convulsions I have ever seen. It was as if he was trying to break his own back. I sprinted down the stairs and found his phone. I found one number that started with 0 and called it. It rang once, followed by the word "go" said by a female voice. Ronin Charlie 3. I screamed. Click. Dial tone. In a panic, I call the number back. To my horror, the line is out of service. At this point, Ray's convulsing so hard that it's shaking the china in our cabinet. Now our doorbell rings. I am about to pass out. I run to the door and open it. There is an ambulance in our driveway and two men in plastic suits with scuba tanks on. They rush past me and run up the stairs. Seconds later, the men come downstairs with my husband in their arms. He is bright red and still shaking. Where are you taking him? No answer. The ambulance speeds off. That was 12 hours ago. Story 8, the real estate in Florida is getting bought out and it isn't by investors. The Floridian was one of many former sleazy Art Deco motels that had been turned into Section 8 apartments in the middle of nowhere, western Palm Beach County, Florida. I moved in for free, permanently, about 5 years ago when it was still a motel after I got a bargain from the owner. He needed some favors in a hurry at the time and he had plenty of vacancies. It's about an hour away from West Palm Beach proper, closer to the Everglades than the beach and surrounded by wetlands and a single road that led to a partially dead shopping mall and a city famous for absurd behavior. My name is Ted McCluskey, and this place is my home. Calling it isolated was an understatement, but I love the green and blue plains that surrounded me. Not many people realize this, but most of the southern part of Florida is a massive expanse of Everglade that humanity has been punishing the shit out of lately. I have borderline personality disorder, so something with a hint of stability and isolation seemed like a great deal at the time. I spent several years barely working and wandering the empty parking lots, enjoying the weed in my hand and the feeling of security in my mind. That was, until the first new neighbors moved in. I don't know if my home was being scouted for potential property flipping or if I just didn't catch wind of the change in the neighborhood. For years the parking lots were empty, but one morning on my way to check out the college chicks at the nearest excuse for a mall, I noticed a new car. I ignored it, and the man with the fake tan who owned it, but 3 days later there were several moving trucks and sedans scattered across the vast parking lots. And a knock on my door. Two fat ham-like people and a college-aged girl with long brown hair and bright blue eyes were at my door. They seemed painfully suburban. The woman was wearing a neon pink dress with pineapples in tuxedos. The girl was thin as a twig and looked exhausted but otherwise seemed normal enough, wearing a weathered Quicksilver shirt. The two parents didn't react at all to me only wearing boxers and smoking a joint, much less the blaring Ariel pink in the background. The girl looked scared out of her wits. "Good morning, buddy. We're new to the neighborhood and wanted to introduce ourselves. I'm Kyle Polk and this is Linda and Jessica. We just moved here from Los Angeles to save money." He waved, and I saw strange wounds on his wrist. I slammed the door shut at that point, checking the window after a moment to see if it was safe. They were moving in 4 doors away. My home didn't need neighbors. For years I had only worked a few hours a week, smoked and grew pot and shrooms and hung out on my stoop. I often turned to using the different apartment numbers to order drugs from Alpha Bay safely. The spectacular amount of vacancies made it a nice, shitty place to live. It was one of those places where the kitchen never worked, but I knew I would miss it one day anyways. The thought of losing all of it made my pulse rise, and I realized the threat of a panic attack was imminent. I guess it's kind of hard to describe what the start of a panic attack feels like, but, suffice to say, pretty bad will have to work. My heart was pumping, and I knew that if it continued to I was going to lose control and freak the fuck out again, maybe even break something or hurt myself. With cops around that could mean a brutal beating for being mentally ill. Thankfully my arsenal was close at hand. I tuned on the lava lamps, a tradition of mine since landing in the room filled with 1970s crap. A couple Xanax, some whiskey, music and weed, and I was right as rain again. Music makes me feel better and a few shums can help me get into it. I started feeling drowsy and heavy in the limbs in no time. I only realized as my eyes were closing that his polo shirt was inside out. For some reason that and the frightened look in the girl's eyes bothered the shit out of me. I kept telling myself the more logical conclusion, that she must have been creeped out by being dragged into a potential conversation with me. Regardless of any questions I had at the time, I had to deal with the unbelievable stress of a mood swing. The next afternoon, after I got home from my only mildly shitty appliance repair gig I picked from Craigslist, there were 3 new vans. 2 of them were U-Hauls and one of those smaller Ford vans that get used to deliver pizzas and stuff. A lady with long black hair was pushing a cart filled with boxes off her U-Haul and towards her apartment when she seemed to suddenly turn towards me. I pretended not to notice her, not wanting to risk another conversation as I walked up to my apartment. There was a yellow coffee-stained note on my door from the landlord asking me to come by his office. I could practically smell the body odor just from the note. As I got around to the southernmost building, I saw something that made me do a double take before I reached Jesse. The family that had knocked on my door earlier was moving in, but into an entirely different apartment. I tried to make it look like I wasn't watching, but stumbled and almost fell when I realized that the wife was different, now a slightly older redhead with a pixie haircut. Probably just helping this woman move in, but it gave me the creeps. They all turned to look. As the adults went inside, the teen girl seemed to try to stifle a wave. She quickly went back to carrying lamps from the U-Haul. Normally I'd give it a week or 2 to see if he really needed to see me or what, but I was awfully curious as to what the fuck was going on and decided to take the time out of my normally busy schedule to go see him. His office and home, both of which stunk of whiskey and whatever the opposite of soap was, were located on the far end of the 4 long apartment buildings surrounding 2 drained pools and a parking lot that composed the Floridian. It was on the 3rd floor out of 3 and it was one of the few places that had a view of the ocean from its balcony. I knocked and the door slid open as its owner told me to come in. Jesse Price was dressed a little better than normal, with a neatly pressed but still badly stained button-down brown shirt and recently laundered cargo shorts. He looked even more rail-thin than normal and his long, poorly styled hair was all combed over to one side. He sat behind an ancient solid pine roll-top desk. All of the furniture was ancient and battered, but extremely well-crafted wood. It made the dark and smoky room look like a pirate's cabin. The powerful aroma of sweat and abused substances the man normally cloaked himself in mingled violently with an incredible amount of cologne. "Hey man, you alright?" He gave me a slightly nervous glance that I didn't understand. I had pretty bad mood swings, but I had gotten a lot better about taking a walk instead of letting them play out. So, we got some new neighbors? Shit man, when it rains it pours, am I right? He looked down at his desk nervously and took out his vape pen. He was convinced that no one would ever notice that the cartridge it contained was clearly not a nicotine-filled one. He took a long, deep drag and held it for a moment. So, 17 so far. They haven't all moved in yet. They seem to be people from Royal Palm, that wealthy spot. There's gonna be more though. I can't tell where they're all coming from, or why a fuck ton of people are suddenly interested in renting shitty cheap apartments in a place that doesn't even have tourist traps anymore, but I have an answering machine filled with missed calls all of a sudden. My eyes must have shot out of my head, because he offered me his vape pen with the most sympathetic face I could imagine him wearing. I took a long hit. You're safe, even though you don't own the land or anything, but, yeah. We're getting new neighbors, and it's hard to tell how many of them or why. God, they're fucking weird. I drifted off, thinking of the pudgy smiling man and his terrified daughter. Jesse raised an eyebrow to me and shrugged. So far none of them are Section 8, so I guess they just want cheap mortgage payments. I'm willing to sell pretty much all of them except mine and that first one you stayed in when you got here. Jesse said of the weird roaring 20s themed room I briefly loved before a mold issue set in. It wasn't normal for people who didn't have a severe mental illness or other serious problem to be on Section 8, which is like welfare for rent, so these weren't the normal temporary boarders and ex-cons we got from Palm Beach. Weird. I began to feel like he had no more new information for me and I desperately wanted to get out of the conversation and the room. Listen, there's nothing weird about these people, the thing is, property values are rising and I hate to put it this way, but it could really be my ship sailing in. I wanted to ask you, do you think you could avoid doing anything, you know? He squinted his face to show the difficulty of trying to convey his worries without offending me and sending me into a mood swing. Weird? I asked, knowing that it was a bit broad of a word in Florida. He winced, knowing that he wasn't the patron saint of normalcy to begin with. Yeah. I'll find a way to make it worth your while, just help me out here. This guy, John Gammon, weird guy, he's an agent or something that seems to be sending people my way. I'm letting them move in while I wait on their bank. They sent reps over but I can't seem to find them on the internet. No idea how he talked people into an hour-long commute to West Palm Beach, but I'm worried he might be happier with me out of the way. Technically this is all owned by a corporation that my dad started and financially speaking, it's on pretty thin ice. A few new residents could make this work, maybe even spruce up the place like I've been meaning to do. Or maybe he'll just make the land cheaper through eminent domain or some other bullshit. He sighed deeply and stared at his desk for a second, giving me a second to react. I could tell he had planned this discussion in some detail, probably hoping to avoid one of my flip-outs. The bad part first explained as part of a larger narrative, then a lot of information to consider, a combo that usually works as long as I'm allowing it to. Yeah, a lot of good and bad things. This guy scares the shit out of me. He's been poking around in more than just the property and I'm worried he'll find something he can use against me. He's coming by later to look through some others. There are some options if you want to permanently buy yours, you know, on the super cheap, of course. I nodded to him and took the card he was offering. Unlike Jesse's grease-stained notes, this one carried a light hint of cologne, despite the difficult time it endured in Jesse's wallet. I didn't want to live around a bunch of people anyways and would plan on leaving if too many moved in. It felt like a horrible eviction, despite the invitation to stay. Without another word I nodded and walked out, jamming my headphones into my ears and blaring some old bossa nova. This was something he was used to, and pretty much on the optimistic side of my behavior. I went home and got mega-wrecked. I had long since turned to using etizolum, which is technically legal in the US despite being very similar to Xanax, allowing me to buy it at about 25 cents a pill. For comparison's sake, Xanax is about $5 for a pill of comparative strength. Thanks to some natural antipsychotic effects, I started thinking rationally about the situation. I began to consider this Ted McCluskey guy. Maybe I could barter Jesse for actual ownership of the apartment, or some kind of stake that could improve my situation. These thoughts continued until I took another etizolum and some other stuff and passed out. I don't know what time I woke up, but sometime late at night, really fucking late, I groggily came to. I didn't remember anything from the day before, one of the great blessings of etizolum. I heard a strange grinding sound directly out of my room. Still badly hungover from the small handful of drugs I had popped, I slowly opened the door of my apartment. 4 doors away from where I carefully poked my head was the ham-faced woman who had knocked on my door the day, Linda Polk. She was wearing a white blouse that was nicely pressed, but not tucked in, to khakis that had several scorch marks with the patterns of an iron. "You okay?" Dread filled me the second the words left my mouth. Her head whipped in my direction, sending droplets of blood sailing. She smiled, revealing a set of teeth that looked like shattered bits of glass sticking from the gore of what was once her mouth. "You have a lovely store." She gurgled and hacked. She ground her teeth furiously, letting one pop like corn in a microwave deep inside her mouth as she turned her enormous bulk in my direction. Her feet slapped against the concrete as she sprinted at me. I slammed the door shut and heard gurgling suburbanite chatter as she came to a halt near my front window. "Wah-nee-doog." She was vomiting random phrases, greetings, pleasantries, through her annihilated mouth. After a while, I poked a hole in the blinds to get a look at her from the side window and she was walking towards the end of the balcony. When she reached it she simply turned away and walked in the other direction blankly until they encountered the other end of the floor, which caused her to repel from the wall and towards the stairs again. I don't know how long she was there. I grabbed my tool bag, a crowbar, some drugs, and jumped out the joke of a rear window. Without transportation, I couldn't just leave, but staying in that apartment wasn't a real option. It wouldn't be the first time I slept in a different apartment. Sometimes I broke into one of the many abandoned apartments just to get a change of pace. They were almost all uninhabited, and I was usually the one doing maintenance anyways. Each one had an entirely different get-up from a different era. A few, like mine, were from the 90s. Some still had the relatively pristine shag carpet, paisley print, and functioning lava lamps of the 60s and 70s. Others had crystal clear Lexan tables, white leather, lots of mirrors, and other trappings of the 80s, including cocaine lines on a mirror I once enjoyed for the same purpose as tribute. Some even had stuff that hinted at earlier origins. The one I chose that night was the first place I had been permitted to crash in, back when Jesse needed help with a heroin problem. I don't mean getting clean. I later moved to my current home because that grand old dame one had a mold issue, but I was still fond of it. It had a gigantic gold-colored glass mirror wall with different tints of glass forming what was once a sunrise. Art Deco from the 20s and 30s adorned every wall. Much of the glass was now broken, the metal tarnished and rusty. It felt comforting to sleep there, as if being able to do as I pleased gave me some level of control over my home again. When I woke up the next morning, I realized that I didn't want any of those creeps to have this particular room. I decided to stick the door shut, so that I could come and go through the shitty attic system. I decided to go talk to Jesse and get a clear list of all of my options and ideas he might have. And also, to check if he was aware of just how fucked up his new neighbors might be. When I got to his office, however, I noticed immediately that the blinds were pulled up. The glass was spotless. A man with a tight blonde haircut and blue eyes who definitely wasn't Jesse sat in an office that had been freshly renovated. I wasn't exactly in the mood for a conversation with one of those fucking creeps. It was time to take an extended walk. That was my last seemingly solid option. Mood swings are a lot like a panic attacks. They're less intimidating cousin, in that you get a lot of energy you can't really channel easily. Listening to music tends to distract me from the emotional momentum, and I could feel my heart pounding almost as fast as the drums keeping up with João Gilberto. The apartment complex/motel was surrounded by marshlands, hemmed in by mangroves, pond apples and sea grapes. Normally I would walk around the complex whenever I got stressed out, but there was now another U-Haul pulling in close to my apartment, so I went around the outer rim of the 3 parallel buildings so I could see some wildlife in the stretches of flat wetlands around us. The parking lot had a relatively steep drop down to the marsh thanks to a shoddy concrete foundation. I have walked, half slid down to the shifting mangrove-choked waterways that surrounded my home. The land and the water were utterly even and interspersed, forming what looks like massive puddles interrupting a dense forest. The fact that some of them were incredibly deep wasn't immediately obvious. It was like traveling to a different planet, and it felt good to be unable to easily see the apartment blocks through the dense wall of green. After about half an hour, I could feel my heart getting back into a relatively safe range. This was when I realized that there was no longer any sound coming from around me. Now, animals normally hit the deck when they hear humans rummaging through their neighborhood to begin with, but I didn't even hear birds, the warning alarms of the animal kingdom. I decided to go a little deeper, to clear my mind of what could have easily been a spell of paranoia. They come and go. With every step, the absence of fish, rodents, even insects became more apparent. My heart began pounding again. I couldn't tell you how long it took, but eventually I got to an area I had only been to once or twice before, where the water suddenly gets deep. I didn't mind stepping in it up to my knee or so, but a small clearing that was normally above the ankle seemed to have been turned into a fish nest, or a circular crater in the sand that fish make with their tails. Except this one was about 8 feet wide. The clearing looked strange, larger than it was previously. I reached into my pocket for my vape pen, which thank God had a fresh cartridge of THC. As I surveyed the trees I noticed that the clearing was quite a bit larger, and a lot more water. Some of the trees seemed to be just tufts of greenery without bark sticking out of the water, which is unusual as fuck for mangrove. I treaded along the sand and took off my shoes to go into some water and get a better look. The tree wasn't short at all. It had been pulled into the fucking ground. The ground itself was about 6 feet away from where it was supposed to be. The mangrove was massive and I could see a lot of it, but the ground below had been pulled down, almost like a sinkhole. Except along the sides, instead of jagged rock from collapsed limestone, there was just a perfectly smooth surface of sand. The massive mangrove was sticking out of it, leaving only the very top of the tree sticking above the water. I couldn't even see the bottom. But the branches and roots mixed far below, they had been bleached white and smooth and entangled each other, making the plant look like a sculpture of an insane orgy. Which was quite enough for me, actually. I quietly went back, put my shoes on and left right away. Something was horribly wrong in my home. The trek back was long and wet and I had every intention of taking a hot shower upon reaching my shitty apartment. After a while, I could see the former mega motel parking lot rising up from some distance, its concrete foundation rudely jutting deep into the natural marshland. The earth pushed up around it like a swollen wound. The moment I reached the parking lot hedgery, I noticed someone walking away. A fat little woman scurried into her apartment as I climbed the embankment. 1 or 2 more new vehicles were parked along the way. Some fresh blood was splattered across a soft pink Ford Focus coupe. I did my best to pretend I didn't notice them, but something made me feel like their inhabitants were watching me. The next hour was spent getting high as fuck. Escapism is a perfectly effective way of dealing with stress temporarily and I needed to feel grounded. That was a lot of weird shit for one day. So, I went for sedatives, Zolum of course, but also a little roxicodone I had picked up. Pretty good stuff, it's great for situations like this. 6 beers and some weed later and I was almost able to address the problem like a sane person, thinking about where I would move and how I might be able to minimize my time in the area. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer, even if those people were normal and I was just imagining shit, which was clearly not entirely the case. I drifted off early and slept late, even for an unemployed person. I dreamed of nothing and felt exhausted when I woke up to the sound of light knocking on my door. I opened the door and the teenaged girl shot past me and into my room before I could say anything. She had been sobbing. You have to help me. Please, you have to help me. She grabbed my shirt and slammed the door behind me. That wasn't my dad, not anymore. You have to help me, we have to get out of here. Do you have a car? She was speaking urgently and tears were welling up in her eyes. What? No, I don't. Wait, what the fuck? These people aren't normal, that's not my dad anymore. They take them to the water and force them in, and when they come back up they're all fucked up. That was my dad, and he's been able to snap out of it sometimes, but they took him to the water again and, She began sobbing powerfully, shuddering. She grabbed my arms as hard as her bony hands could allow and stared at me with horrified eyes. I think he's dead, I think he's dead. She took a step back from me and half sat, half collapsed on an orange plastic chair. Your dad? She looked confused at this. No. That fucking monster who's been holding me captive. I hit him with a lamp. I have some car keys, but I don't know which car they go to. Can you steal that other guy's car? I think they got him anyways. Jesse, what the fuck did they do to him? I didn't see his car out there today. Whose keys do you have and why don't we use them? And what the fuck happened to you? She shook her head and looked down, visibly upset by what she had seen. I didn't see. But 2 of those things grabbed him after I tried to get him to make a break for it. I don't know which car these keys are for. When they're around each other they don't talk like we do. First they killed my mom. Then they killed my real dad. Then they forced me to act like that. She sobbed and shook violently. We used to live outside Port Charlotte. My dad built a house right on the water. That's where they come from. They forced us to walk. The last word turned into a moan as she sunk into the chair, no longer maintaining any kind of eye contact. Jesus Christ, where do they come from? Who are they? I don't know, they just wander, in the swamp, until they find a place. If more of them come, they force you to dig in the water to find something in the roots. They aren't in control anymore. When they start breaking down, and they can't act normal anymore, they go crazy. My dad wasn't like that, but eventually they took him to the swamp. When he came back, we hoped everything was going to be okay. I really didn't want to know what the fuck that meant. I grabbed an old chef's knife and handed her a broken bedpost I was supposed to have sanded and replaced about 2 months ago. She weakly wrapped her hand around it and barely tried to slow it as it dropped to the ground, but she picked it up again and stood up with something resembling determination. I walked slowly to the back window, hoping those fucking creeps were slow learners. I looked out at the back lot and made sure it was empty before getting ready to climb down. My name is Jeanette. Jeanette Pauly, if I don't get out of here and you do. I nodded solemnly and put my hand on her shoulder to let her know I meant it. I'm Ted and we are going to get out of here. The wayfish girl nodded and quickly followed behind me, slowly climbing our way down 3 drain pipes as quietly as possible. She tapped my shoulder once we got to the bottom, putting a finger to her lips but showing me the car keys before directing me to the real lot. We readied our weapons, but didn't see anyone, not even any lights on. I paused a moment before getting ready to turn the corner, hoping to God that nothing was behind that corner waiting for us. The knife suddenly felt dull and flimsy. I pressed my back against the concrete wall and slowly moved around the corner. I thought it was the wind, but something told me the low sound I heard was a human voice. Sure enough, an old man in a shirt with a cane was walking in the direction of the middle building in the dead center of the parking lot, blood pouring down his face and neck as he gibbered aimlessly. I wondered if I could creep around him, but I didn't get to wander long. His head shot in my direction when I thought I would have been out of his field of vision. What a cute puppy. What's his name? Or at least it was probably what he said, as he no longer had the ability to form consonants due to a badly mangled mouth. I heard the bones in the man's leg crack as he ran to us, but it didn't slow him down. His foot broke, then the ankle, with bones sticking out. It collapsed in sideways, forcing him to run on the side of his ankle, but it didn't seem to change the excited look on his face. I could hear running footsteps from behind us as well, and gibbering. Jeanette moved to my left and flanked the old man. I took a step back, hoping they couldn't keep silent and that there weren't some sneaking up on us. Jeanette swung, and the old man's brutalized face largely collapsed. I stabbed him, pushing the knife through what felt like the toughest, most sinewy set of pork ribs I had ever encountered, and he dropped to the ground. I leaned down to get the knife, hearing the gibbering of a fat woman and a skinny young man gaining on us from the parking lot we had just left when the old man grabbed my hand. I tried to ignore the gurgles that sounded like he was thanking me as I yanked the blade free. I got back up barely in time for the young Hispanic man, who was unfortunately in great shape aside from his mouth, which he had chewed into a bone and blood-strewn pulp. Hi, which aisle for canned goods? He almost screamed as he swung one of his fists at me. Despite seeing it coming, years of drug use had made me a little slower than I'd like and his fist connected to my jaw. I felt unbelievable pain fire through my face and neck as a terrible crack rang out in my ears. I heard Jeanette scream and had a brief second to see the fat woman on top of her, pinning her down as blood ran from the woman's mouth onto her face, before the young man's fist blotted out the world. When I came to, I could feel my hands pinned behind me by something sharp that pinched when I tried to move. Jeanette was across from me, covered in blood and not moving, while Jesse sat at the other end of a small clearing, covered in blood, awake but not moving. It was dead at night and we were far enough from civilization to see the stars, which I suddenly didn't find reassuring. The distance I had spent my life cultivating was now a problem. Jesse, Jeanette? Jesse's eyes moved in my direction, but then seemed to roll to the back of his head, as if he were put in sudden and horrible pain. He seemed to be focused on something. Jesse, what the fuck happened? My mouth was filled with pain and blood at the attempt to speak, but Jeanette seemed to come to at the sound of my voice. Jesse tried to look in my direction and shake his head, but didn't say anything. I heard splashing approaching from the mangroves that surrounded us and suddenly felt myself being dragged through increasingly deep puddles. I could hear Jeanette crying. That was when I began fighting a bit. I kicked, thrashed and struggled until I finally turned over and saw the young Hispanic man and a massive fat woman in a blue and red blouse stood over me. This time they were utterly silent. I saw the brown fist coming and this time managed to make it to the side, hearing it smash into the mud behind me. Suddenly the fat woman ran towards Jesse and Jeanette. I kicked and got him in the balls, but it didn't do much. Thankfully, when he corrected his position to punch me again, I managed to kick the inside of his leg hard enough to bring him down. Whatever was wrapped around my wrists was hurting the shit out of me, but I twisted my hand again anyways. I could feel the flesh from my left hand rip like a plastic bag, but I felt something come free as I kicked the guy again. He managed to get up and kick me in the ribs, and I felt the air shoot out of me. He was just about to get me again when Jesse managed to reach him. I don't know how he got free, but I saw what was holding me back. A thick vine with horrible barbs was dangled from the ripped flesh of his hands as he kicked the man in the head while he was down. I managed to get up and join him, but my hands were still bound. After he stopped moving so much, Jesse managed to help pluck the barbs out of my skin and then we both helped Jeanette. The fat woman was lying face down, seemingly drowned in a relatively deep puddle. She must have not noticed Jesse getting free. Once and again, Jeanette put her finger to her lips, pointing out into the dark behind us and shaking her head with fear. Suddenly I noticed splashing noises making their way to us. Jeanette managed to duck behind a tree cluster and into a heavy bush while I hid behind a thin group of trees that effectively formed a small wall with a crack. I couldn't see Jesse. 4 people entered the clearing, all of them stared at the bodies. They waited a moment, then slowly went to both bodies, leaning down and smelling them before slowly picking them up and dragging them to the massive body of water that had once been a normal deeper part of the wetlands. First they dropped the fat woman into the water, then the young man. Then the 4 strangers dispersed, walking in seemingly random directions. They seemed to almost ricochet, not seeking a way around objects or a certain course, but reacting away from them and walking in a different direction. I could see Jeanette cover her mouth in horror as a woman, maybe in her 50s, walked near her, with a blank look on her face and blood staining her disheveled blouse. Unknown to this woman, Jeanette was crouched in a heavy bush that thankfully seemed to cover her, muffling her crying with her hand. I was worried about her breaking her silence when suddenly I heard a bunch of twigs break and all 4 of the strangers looked off to my far left. Jesse had managed to get behind several trees, but in order to keep his body hidden he had to pin himself up there. He fell, landing in thick swamp bush. "No, no, no, you son of a bitch, no!" he screamed as they closed on him. "Please, no, please." I could see him flailing, but more were coming. As Jeanette and I watched, they brought him, kicking and screaming, to the water, where they put him in. "Please don't fucking do this. Please don't fucking do this." Those were the last words I ever heard from Jesse. As a woman I later learned was once Jeanette's mother placed her hands on his head and slowly pushed down. Then Jesse was dragged below by something I could not see. The people who had held him down, now 7, stood up and began to walk away in the same disorganized way they had previously used, walking away from many obstacles and not having any clear direction, but leaving the clearing quickly anyways. I don't know how long we waited there, but it was more than a few minutes until I finally saw Jeanette wave and then motion for me to follow her. Before I did, I took a few cautious steps forward instead. I had to see what had happened to my friend. Some part of me thought I could still save him. It was too dark to see much, but I saw him all right. The roots were no longer at the bottom of the massive pit, a small group had stretched upwards. Jesse was still just below the surface and I could see the glistening white roots penetrating his flesh all over his body before I turned and followed the shocked Jeanette. They looked like they were either pumping something into him. We saw a few as we left the swamp, but as long as we didn't move they seemed to just ricochet about. It took 3 hours to finally reach a road, and another 45 minutes before a car came. The police had a fun time with it, until some federal guys who claimed to be part of the Fish and Wildlife something or another but probably weren't came by. They took both of us to a secure facility and interrogated the shit out of us, but we came out all right. I got the impression this wasn't the first time they had seen this. A fire burned down my old home. Couldn't guess on whether that was the government or those creeps. I talked to Jeanette again a few weeks ago. They told her aunt in California that her family was killed in a boating accident. I saw Jesse again too. As I was leaving West Palm, driving up I-95 to get the fuck out of there. He was standing on the edge of a pond staring at the road in a relatively nice-looking polo shirt. He smiled when he saw my car and waved. I'm pretty sure his polo shirt was inside out. Story 9, The Lost Marine. Ever since I was born, I wanted to be a United States Marine. My father served in Vietnam as a devil dog, and my mother as a nurse. They both always told me stories of what happened over there as I got older. The more mature I became, the more gruesome a story was. Well, now I am 31 years old and did my time in the Marines. So it's my time to share with anybody who bothers anymore. I was an 0311 rifleman between 2003 and 2009. I fought in the war for Fallujah, Iraq. We were partnered up with Iraq soldiers, Brits, and Aussies. I especially admired the Australians because they kept buying us beer. Anyways, we were clearing houses one by one, occasionally meeting Haji shitheads who tried to kill us. It came around 2200 hours and we set up base in some apartment building. One squad was on watch, others sleeping, other doing patrols and whatnot. I was stuck on watch over the two dumbass lieutenants in the middle of the street. We had to dig a couple of fighting holes, and they were sitting in the middle one, pointing at their map, and occasionally talking on the radio. I decided to go to my fighting hole towards the front side of the building, keeping an eye on the lieutenants. My battle buddy followed, and we sat opposite of each other, whispering of what we were going to do back home. Then a loud shaking sound pierced the dead quiet, and caused me to turn around and nearly shoot. A Marine with all his equipment, including his M4 and NVs resting on his Kevlar. I watched him jump into the lieutenant's fighting hole and start chatting with them. "Fucking private," my buddy said. I decided to go over to them while my buddy covered us. I slid into the hole, only to fucking realize that he wasn't there anymore. The lieutenants looked as pale as a ghost, and when I asked where he was, they replied with "Get inside the building." I followed orders confused as fuck, getting my buddy and waiting at the door. They came in without a word and walked into a kitchen area of the building. They told me to never speak of this but, fuck it. They stated that the private was killed by a now dead sniper. I asked him how the fuck because I didn't hear a single gunshot. Lieutenant was now rinsing his face in a sink and the other started talking. "Fuck man, he told us he's lost and needs his unit, so we radioed it in and they told us that the Marine was killed 4 hours earlier due to said sniper. We asked for confirmation and sure enough, they said yeah he's fucking gone. Then we turned around and I shit you not, he's gone." I had many other strange experiences in Iraq which are for later if I don't get a fucking flashback tonight. If you are still here, congrats. I'm not asking for upvotes or shit like that, I just needed to get it out of my system. Thanks, fuck you, and talk to you later. Story 10, Death is coming to try to claim me soon, but only if he beats me in a game of my choice. I've seen a lot happen in my 72 years on this earth. Things you wouldn't dream of when I was in my teens are soon becoming things of the past while new technologies are being ushered in. If I play my cards a certain way, I'll be there to see them all and more. I was born in Danbury, Connecticut in the year 1947. At the age of 4, I was told that I came very close to killing my mother in childbirth, but the doctors were able to save both of us with no major issues. I had one brother, who died when he was sent over to Vietnam later on in life. My life has been somewhat normal, even the aggressive cancer doesn't seem too out of the ordinary. I'd be just another person on this planet if not for one woman and one night I can't forget. It was 1964. My girlfriend, Bethany, and I had been going steady for about 3 months at that point. Prom was right around the corner, and I was excited for it, to say the least. I knew in the bottom of my heart that she was the girl I wanted to marry, but I didn't want to be so forward. I was walking home from a party one night with Beth and I felt like I was on the top of the world. She was beautiful in every was to me. She was smart, pretty, and cared for me when my dad had drunk himself to sleep and my mom had more or less done the same. Looking back, I'm just glad they weren't angry drunks. From the corner of my eye I could see the car barely making a turn down to our street. It swerved out of control, but it only became a life or death situation when it headed right for us with a clearly drunk man behind the wheel, not conscious of his actions, was surely about to murder both of us. What happened next is what I considered an act of God, foolishly enough. The driver seemed to snap out of his trance and furiously slam on the brakes. He got out of the car immediately and apologized to us for what he almost did. I was just thankful that I wasn't dead, to be honest. Until prom, I felt like there was an angel watching over me and the girl I was destined to be with. That couldn't have been further from the truth. I showed up at Beth's doorstep so when she came out, we would be right on time to prom. I didn't want to lose any time of the night I had been waiting for so long. She came out looking more beautiful than I had ever thought possible, which honestly made me scared at the time that she would leave our town to pursue a modeling career. I don't remember anything else leading up to the moment that ironically, I'll never forget. I'm not too sure I really want to remember the unforgettable, either. We were slow dancing to that song, Unchained Melody. Feeling her in my arms was like nothing I've ever felt before. We truly loved each other with all our hearts. That moment, swaying to the beat of that song, I was happier than I ever would be. 2 summer jobs supplied me with the ring I hoped she wouldn't feel in my pocket until the time was right. I was more than prepared to spend the rest of my life with the girl I met the first day of school, in the class I thought I'd regret the most. I was just the chess nerd that everyone made fun of for never leaving the library. I don't know what she saw in me. I would have much rather had typing class than wood shop, but I know that that would have been the worst mistake of my life. I didn't fall in love with her right when I saw her, but as I got to know her more and more. We could have had so much more time with each other if it wasn't all ruined on that one damn night. The slow dance feels in my mind like it was hours upon hours. If I had one wish in this world, it would be to suspend myself in that one moment, embracing a woman that I planned to spend the rest of my life with. The second we stepped out of that gym, I started to get down on one knee but was stopped short. What happened next ruined my life forever, even though I knew her for so little. She collapsed right in front of me. Time stood still as I checked for her pulse to no avail. I sobbed uncontrollably as I held her in my arms, lifeless for no apparent reason whatsoever. I was about to yell for help when another kid walked up to me, seemingly out of nowhere. Any way I try and describe this being wouldn't do it justice. He looked about my age, but the black robe he was wearing was emanating a sense of dread and despair unlike anything you could ever imagine. A pained look of horror rested upon his face as he inspected what had just happened. I'm so sorry. I loved her as much as you did. I really wanted her. I'm so sorry, man. I didn't realize what I was doing, it just kinda happened, you know? Oh man, he's gonna kill me. Man, I'm so sorry, I can't even tell you how bad I'm gonna get it for this. I wanna find love too, you know? Why did she have to fall in love so early with you? Look, he'll probably contact you soon, just get out of here. I'm sorry, man. I could feel how much you loved her. Before I could say a word, the guy vanished as soon as he had come. Panic set in, and I ran, as soon and as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I got to my house and slammed the door behind him. Beer in hand, I tried to process what had just happened. She was gone. That much I knew. Even in my sorrow, I knew from that robe that the kid must have been some sort of servant of death, like the Grim Reaper, in a lot of horror stories that I loved. I don't know how the exact situation became clear to me so soon. Another man would have spent hours upon hours just figuring out why the kid had such a mortifying aura surrounding him. He must have killed her. Because he loved her too. I cried and stamped my fist on the table in front of me, cracking the glass. What right did this merchant of death have to take the woman I loved away from me? I cried myself to sleep that night, too confused to make out most of the events that had unfolded before me. The next day, I awoke in my bed with a letter on my chest. The letter read as follows: Dear Sir, we are sorry for the inconvenience that one of our men has brought upon you. The advisors have determined that your life is ruined, so we'll give you a chance at another one. I, the Grim Reaper, will come out at your planned time of death and face you in a game or competition of your choice. If you are the victor, you will be reborn with all knowledge of your past life, and if you are not, you will be in a sleep-like state for eternity. Regards, the Grim Reaper. I spent the entire day making sense of the whole situation. One of their men or whatever must have loved my woman, and took her from me out of spite. Now, I was getting a chance to get a second life after this one. I didn't get it, but it slowly became my reality when I read in the paper that my Bethany was truly dead. I got a good job when I got out of college, but I could never fall in love again. My only love had been taken from me, and my heart would be missing a piece for the rest of my existence, however long that I thought it could be. I never felt a connection with people I was set up with, and retired early because I buried myself in my work. I guess the advisors were right, I was living a ruined life. When the doctor told me I had cancer, I didn't know whether to feel happy or sad. Seeing both of my parents die was almost surreal because I knew I would be meeting the very force that took them from me. I didn't see them much, and they lived a happy life, even though one of their children died in the war, while I would barely make an appearance at family gatherings. I decided to write this now out of fear, for lack of a better term. I haven't been able to choose my contest, but I guess chess will have to do if I'm brought on the spot. The old man in hospital scrubs who delivers me my meals a little too much scares me to the point where I can barely sleep. What if he's the Grim Reaper? I try not to remember that my whole life has just been trying to get over losing the person I was supposed to be with forever. The doctor told me, just before I wrote this, that I only had a few days more to live. I'm not sure whether I want to win or lose my game with death, I just know that it's coming soon. I have to come to terms with the fact that life from age 18 to 72 has been late nights at the office, pondering what could have been. Lying in bed at night, wondering what could have been. Lying in this cold hospital bed, all alone, dreaming about what should have been. A life with the woman I loved. I'm not sure I want to think about it anymore. Story 11, The Devil Does Not Bargain for Souls. Every day I tell myself that I am going to stop drinking, yet every day I find myself picking up the glass once more. It's a good thing I don't drink that much daily. I know liver will probably fall apart by the time I reach my 60s, but I have yet to come across a better way to calm the storm that has been raging in my mind ever since I met him. Back in 2013, I requested my leave from the Syrian observation mission. At that point, I had grown tired from seeing all the pointless bloodshed that was going on there. I had been a soldier pretty much my whole adult life up to that point, and being so powerless was probably just a tad too much for me. Once I was granted my release, I had decided to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It was a lovely trip, all in all. One evening I've decided to clear my head at a local bar. I was sitting there, completely zoned out as some silly club music blared through the speakers. My head was in the clouds, that is, until a gruff voice snapped me back into reality. What does a United Nations soldier do in such a place? My mind snapped back into fight mode as my head snapped sharply to my left. A bearded man was sitting next to me. He was visibly a few inches taller than me, and his smug expression made me a little uneasy. Not to mention the fact that he was not supposed to know my profession, or so I thought back then. How? I was cut off short. How do you know, you'd like to ask? He retorted, as a wide smile formed on his face. A knot began forming inside my stomach. I almost felt sick with the build-up of dread. I began clenching my fists. A million thoughts whirled in my mind. I could not fathom at the time the existence of this person. The Lord of Flies knows many a thing. He chuckled at me, further adding to my nervousness. I was about to explode at him and demand answers in regard to his strange behavior and impossible knowledge. However, the man reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out some old coin. He proceeded to toss it into the air as my eyes followed every single movement of his. As the coin spun through the air, it started slowing down mid-flight and everything around me. The music stopped playing, the lights above had stopped moving and the coin froze in the air. The sight made my heart sink. My fear was probably evident as the man was trying hard not to burst into laughter. None of this made any sense to me back then, and all I could muster was a soft, unconfident, "What?" Time stood still around me, quite literally. Everything was simply frozen in time. I didn't know how to react, I didn't know what to think, I could move as the whole situation was too hard to process. The man reached out his hand to me, offering a handshake. "Beelzebul, my pleasure, Daniel. W.H. H. I couldn't speak, I felt sick, this was too much for me to handle and I threw up on the floor. My head was spinning and my heart raced, I felt awful. There was no mistaking it, I was approached by some sort of something supernatural. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to know my name. I wiped my face and looked at the man whom I assumed was the devil at that point. He had lowered his arm and took a sip of his beer. I know, it's quite shocking, all of this. It's not my first rodeo with you humans. Not wanting to piss off someone who could stop time and probably knew about me more than I wanted anyone to, I cautiously asked him, "Are you the devil?" The man burst out into a maddening laughter, which had somewhat put me at ease. "Oh, father, this joke again." He mused to himself as some beer had spilled on his coat, clearly amused by lack of awareness towards higher beings such as himself. "No, no, I am not the devil, it's a common misconception. However," he proceeded to note, "you see, angels, demons, whatever we are all the same kind. There was no big fight or even a divide between us. There is not much of a hierarchy or rule set between us. We are truly equal to one another. Everything you know about us is a human fiction." He continued speaking, "Every time Father tried speaking to you humans, you go mad. I guess you're still not a high enough level to communicate with the old man." This made very little sense to me as it was the opposite from what I was taught my whole life. I wasn't sure if I should believe this person or not. After all, he was claiming to be a demon. I guess he had noticed the doubt written all over my face as he made a snarky remark towards me. "If I was lying, wouldn't I be tempting you with something right now? You know, the Prince of Gluttony, yada yada. No, I just... Yeah, I get it, Daniel, you've been indoctrinated to believe in some weird anthropocentric story. Mind you that there are millions, perhaps even billions of species who are even more intelligent than your kind. To be honest, I'm pretty certain there are beings who are more advanced than my father, somewhere out there. There are probably beings higher than God." I had nothing to say, I was completely shocked by this revelation. While on the one hand, the things he was saying were making sense, on the other hand, they weren't making any sense at all. So, how does this whole cosmic order thing work then? I asked weakly. "Well, anything with a consciousness mechanism has what you define as a soul. It includes me, you, everything else on this planet with a complex neural system. Even Father has that sort of thing. Now, nothing is really eternal, eventually, everything dies. At one point, every sentient being will pass away." He answered, "Even God?" I was unsure if I even wanted to hear the answer to that question, and yet I asked, anyway. Yeah. Someday, in the future. You are aware of the fact that he isn't all creator of everything? As obvious as this should have been at that point, this sentence sent chills down my spine. I sank deeper into my chair. HMPH. Here's the kicker though, there one thing you humans got right, in a way, hell is real. The circumstances around it are what you got wrong. What do you mean, don't the wicked go there? I asked him in response. No, not the wicked but the guilty. He proclaimed as he hoisted his cup of beer into the air. The guilty? I asked, puzzled. Yeah. If you die feeling guilt over something, it turns into a negative energy and your consciousness goes to this dimension where it has to rid itself of said guilt. It has to be a major thing. However, if you feel guilty for something extremely minor, you are most likely to just dissipate into the universe. Once he had finished speaking about the inner workings of the universe, I looked directly into his green eyes and asked, with as much confidence as I could muster, "So, why are you telling me all of this?" He smiled that unsettling smile once again. "It's because I need your opinion on something, Daniel. Let's have a walk, shall we?" He got up from his chair and began walking towards the entrance of the bar. At first, I was hesitant to do anything and I watching him walk for a few moments before I heard him call out to me. Not wanting to piss off a thing that could stop time, and probably murder me on a whim. I got up to my feet, ignoring the dried puke on my shoes and started catching up with the man. Once I reached him he was at the bar's entrance, pressing his hand against the door. As the door swung open, a bright light engulfed me, blinding me for a moment. It felt as if a flash grenade was thrown straight at me. The light was so bright it almost hurt. After an agonizing few seconds, the light began dispersing and a familiar sight greeted my eyes. "No way!" I blurted under my breath. "We are in Syria, next to some rebel encampment," Beelzebul announced, almost gleefully. I looked around and the bar building was right behind me. However, it was surrounded by the nearly endless sands of the Syrian desert. I was in this place before. There was no mistaking it, this was the Syrian desert. As I was trying to process whatever was going on around me, Beelzebul asked me, "Tell me, Daniel, do you believe that all humans deserve to live?" He caught me off guard, but this was probably the easiest answer I had to give that day. "Yes, I do," I answered, still eyeing my surroundings, even the sadistic band of serial murder rapists in this encampment before us. He asked again, pointing at the makeshift paramilitary compound. "Yes. Even them? If what you say about them is true, they should be detained and tried, but they do deserve to live. Killing them won't make it any better." It was still an easy question. I don't believe killing will ever salvage anything. I doubt the death penalty is a good way to rid ourselves of crime even to this day. I see. Well, follow me, I need to show you something that might change your mind. Beelzebub began walking towards the bar building once more, pushing the door open again. I stumbled across the sands after him. The alcohol I had consumed earlier was starting to take effect again. A bright light blinded me again, followed by a freezing breeze that sent chills throughout my whole body. Once I had regained my sight, I found myself standing at the beginning of a large stone bridge, above a deep dark pit. The longer I stared down, the more I came to realize that I could not see the bottom of this hole. The dread started eating at me once more when another gust of freezing wind hit my body. Soon after I began hearing screaming coming from up above me. I turned my head upwards ever so slightly to see a human body, a naked human body falling towards me from up above. This body was alive, I could tell so as it was flailing its limbs about. The body's screams growing louder with each passing moment. When the body was mere inches from me, I saw its face. Oh God, its face. The despair was permanently etched onto its features. There was a fearful stare in its glaring eyes. The cheeks' muscles were stretched beyond what I thought was possible due to the constant screaming. Drool and tears flew all over. I know that we shared eye contact for the briefest of moments, but I've never seen someone in so much pain before. Is this H? I mumbled as the body flew past me, into the seemingly never-ending darkness below. Yes, Beelzebul noted, with a smile stretching from ear to ear. He seemed to be almost glowing in that god-forsaken place. Long after the body flew past me, I could hear its constant screaming. It kept on ringing in my ears for a long time after I had left that cursed abyss. Beelzebul lead me on atop the stone bridge for quite some time, and the longer I walked on this bridge, the more I wanted out of there. These bodies, they kept on falling. All over. Oh, God. Some hit the bridge. Massive blood stains. They kept on falling. They just slipped downwards, back into the bottomless maw of their Abaddon. I'm so sorry. It's hard bringing this up again in detail, even though it never leaves me, even though it haunts me in my dreams. After some walking, Beelzebul stopped me and asked me to look down to my left. When I looked I saw a piece of rock protruding from the darkness itself, On top of the rock there was a sea of people walking one after another in circles. In an unbreakable harmony they march forever, one after the other, each step seemed more fatigue than the last one. Beelzebul told me that those were the people who've died harboring the guilt of following a bad leader. These were Nazi soldiers, terrorists, mob soldiers, all sorts of weak-minded individuals who knew they were following the wrong leader and still went on with it. Beelzebul even called them pathetic for harboring such a guilt, noting that these were his least favorite kind of hellspawns. I felt bad for them. I do understand their guilt. The reasons I left my active service in Syria because of my powerlessness, brought upon me by a set of regulations that do not strive to prevent as much suffering as possible. I hated that feeling. I hated feeling powerless, and yet look at me now, I am powerless more than ever before. We kept on walking across the stone bridge for some more time before a rancid stench filled my nostrils. Beelzebul told me to look to my right. There was another protrusion made of stone peeking through the darkness. On top of the protrusion, there was a pile of a dark substance made of what smelled like feces. I had a hard time looking at that direction as the stench was way too vile for me. Beelzebul, on the other hand, was enjoying the view of a human pull himself out of the pile online to be sunk back down into it by another human's arms as the latter tried to pull himself out as well, only to suffer the same fate at the hands of another. Can we leave? It stinks too bad, I cried out from underneath my shirt-covered mouth. Beelzebul just grunted in approval and led me on across the bridge of stone. Soon enough we were standing at the edge of a forked path. One diversion was made up of stone, another of some pulsating fleshy mass, and another was made up of sand. Beelzebul lead me on the path of sand. I'd like you to meet someone, Daniel, someone very important. He's been here for nearly 2 millennia, Beelzebul remarked with some glee in his tone. 2,000 years? I muttered. I couldn't even bear staying another hour in this place, and yet someone was there for 2,000 years. Beelzebul did not speak for a while as we walked on the sandy path. I grew more and more anxious with each moment, to the point of trembling. My mind was racing, my breathing was quick and shallow. I'm sorry, I can't. I need a moment to relax. I can't type properly. Eventually, we reached a large sand dune. It was the biggest sand dune I have ever seen. It was so massive it towered everything else in sight. A literal sand giant in the middle of a world made out of pure darkness. I'd like you to meet Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, announced Beelzebul in a gleeful tone. A young, tall and skinny man dressed in a blooded tunic strutted out of the sand dune. He had a very fixated, cold stare in his eyes. It's like he was bulging his pupils out at us. The man just stared for a minute or so. The surrounding atmosphere was so tense, you could cut it in half. He shrieked like a wounded animal and fell onto the sand, screaming obscenities at the old Roman deities and the Senate. He then began shrieking about how he should be the god of this world, the god of all worlds, from the Capitoline Hill down to the depths of Tartarus. He began rolling around in the sand, screaming at the top of his lungs that he is the emperor god of all and that he should have had made them fear him more. He then proceeded to shove sand down his own throat, first with his hands, and then he just felt on the ground first and started swallowing the sand beneath him with his mouth. He wouldn't stop that for a while, not even when it was clear that he was choking on the sand. I swear I could see some sand pouring down from his nasal cavity. The man was a complete wreck. At some point his stomach could not contain any more of the substance and he threw it all out, producing vile choking sounds as he did. He then started rolling in his own vomit, shrieking about fear and control, and no matter for how long he rolled in the sand, he kept his stare fixated on me. There was something really unnerving about his almost fish-like hazel eyes being locked on me. He began screaming obscenities again as he ran onto the top of the dune, while I watched in pity as he hurled himself down its sands. His body rolled around in the sand like a rag doll tossed about. I could hear the sickening cracking sounds of his bones echo throughout the space as his body was being folded in unnatural angles by his own momentum. Eventually, his broken body landed at my feet. The body laid there as his limbs were folded awkwardly. His body was positioned on its belly with the head turned in 180 degrees. His goddamned fish eyes were staring straight at me. I felt a knot build up in my stomach again. I was sure I would throw up again. I could literally feel the food rising up my esophagus. Pota your god. The body whispered. It startled me. A moment later I found myself sitting back at the bar, next to Beelzebul, shaking with fear as my mind was racing. Nothing made any sense to me anymore, at all. I looked at Beelzebul and the back of my head began throbbing as I was hit with a hammer across the head. My vision started blurring and my ears began ringing. I don't. I managed to blurt out as I was trying to fight through my sudden headache. So, did your meeting with Little Sandals made you change your mind about the value of all human lives? Beelzebul asked. I don't. No. I forced myself to respond weakly as my head felt as if it was about to blow up. Beelzebul drank up all of his remaining beer and said, well, that's a shame because I already slaughtered that whole Syrian encampment. As he said that, the pain in my head began subsiding and disturbing images began popping up in my mind. I've seen it. I've seen it all. The way he tore them apart. The way he ripped them to shreds. I felt the tears. I felt the tears streaming down my cheeks just like they do now. As I write this, I can't get the image of him making a gun sign with his fingers, shoving it down a kneeling man's mouth and blowing up his skull. Oh God. Beelzebul was gone after that. I heard that damned coin fall onto the wood. I placed my head on my arms and began crying. I couldn't stop. I can't. He was gone. But the guilt. It's there. It's all my fault. All of this is my fault. It's my fault I followed him there. Everything is my fault. Please pardon me, I am just a sorrowful drunk with a lot on his plate. I know now that the devil does not bargain for souls. He simply guilts their owners straight to hell where he can watch them suffer for as long as he wants them to. I'll drink to the craftiness of this son of a gun. Cheers. Story 12. There's hundreds of us trapped, please send help. 11:37 a.m. If you can see this, please send help. There's hundreds of people trapped in a theme park and very weird things are happening. I'm using my phone so I'm sorry if there's any formatting errors. I'll start at the beginning and get you up to date. A new theme park opened today. For its grand opening it had 75% off ticket prices, and because the theme park is mixed together with a zoo, that seemed like a bargain. I saw it advertised in an email from one of those student money saver sites that send you coupons and special offers and things. It's my wife's birthday next week and we've just bought a house together so we're broke. She said don't bother with birthday gifts because the house is enough, but who doesn't celebrate birthdays? Anyway, I ordered the tickets and got them sent to me in an email for me to print off at home. Amy's into roller coasters and thrills, I'm more into the animals. So I guess this was the perfect park for us. The tickets said that because it was the grand opening, the gates would open at 10 a.m. and the celebrations would start with a parade, so it was recommended to get there for exactly 10 a.m. We got there 15 minutes early and lined up behind what I'd estimate to be at least a few hundred other people, and more guests joined behind us. At 10 a.m. a little tune sounded over the speakers next to the gates as they automatically opened. We started making our way through to the entrance, where we scanned our tickets to gain entry. I didn't realize at the time but there were no staff members. Walking into the park everything looked so clean and newly built. We live about a half hour away and I'd passed this site a few times while it was under construction and remember being really curious as to what it was. This theme park, like I said, also features a zoo. But where most parks like this have the zoo separate to the rides, this one's kind of intertwined and there's a giant aquarium underground that the park's built over that links about 10 massive tanks scattered around the park together. That's the main reason I decided to buy the tickets. Roller coasters are roller coasters but it's not every day you see a zoo set up like this. It was one of these tanks I noticed first. It sits in the middle of the entrance and splits the path off two ways around the park. At first I noticed the size. This thing is absolutely huge, I'd say about 90 feet wide and around 30 feet tall. It was full of coral and you could see where it goes under the grounds of the park, which looks absolutely incredible. But there was no fish. I guess they were in another part of the aquarium, since it's all linked together. People started wandering off to explore the park, so Amy asked me where I want to go first. I guess it doesn't matter, we're going to see it all anyway. Plus it's your birthday treat, so you can decide, I said. Cool, Eagle's Claw first? She replied, sure thing. We turned left at the aquarium and walked for around 10 minutes past empty fields to the first ride. On the way there I noticed there were a bunch of buildings that seemed closed. I guess they're opening a little later, I thought. It's the first day after all, so there's probably kinks they need to work out. As we got to the first ride there was a big crowd of people stood around it. Hiya, what's going on? I asked a man at the back of the group who had his young daughter on his shoulders. There's no staff, how are we supposed to go on the rides? He replied. This was when I realized that I hadn't seen a member of staff since we came into the park. The digital ticket scanners threw me off, I guess. Where were they? I'm going back to the entrance to see if I can find anyone, the man shouted to the crowd, and he began walking back. Some of the group followed, some stayed to wait for staff members. Amy and I followed him to see if we could find anyone. I was starting to get a little unsettled, but Amy didn't seem to realize. I grabbed her hand and we followed the crowd back to the entrance. As we got closer to the buildings at the entrance we heard screams coming from the other path from the entrance, followed by people running. I grabbed Amy's hand tighter and started running towards the entrance to meet them there. A few of the group followed me. The gates were closed. No staff to be seen. There was a huge bang and loads of smoke. People started screaming and running away. One woman struggled to explain through her heavy breathing. Was anybody hurt? Has anyone phoned the emergency services? The man with the child on his back asked. I don't know. Smoke poured out of a shed, white smoke. There was so much, it just enveloped everyone so quickly, so we started running, she replied. A group of people had gotten their phones out and tried to phone for ambulances/police, but nobody could get through. I checked my phone, I had signal, so I tried calling. It just rang. Nobody answered. I tried messaging my little brother through Facebook because he's always on it. I'm at that new theme park/zoo they've just built. There's been an accident but we can't get through to an ambulance, can you try? Signal might be weird here. This message could not be sent. Retry? I tapped retry. Almost immediately got the error message again. Oh shit, I'll try texting. I told Amy. I tried to send the message again through text. It looked like it was sending, but then message not sent popped up in red underneath the message box. What the hell? Bang. The little implies only box next to the entrance blew wide open and a thick white smoke gushed out. There was so much smoke, it shouldn't have all fit inside that tiny shack. Everyone turned and started running away, knocking me off my feet. I quickly got up and started running with them to a nearby building. We poured inside and locked the door behind us. I was one of the last inside, so I turned around to watch out the window to see the smoke. There was still people outside trying to run away, and the smoke. It didn't just leave the shack and expand out, it sort of maintained a shape like a giant snake made entirely of smoke. It followed the path around to the buildings as if it was chasing the people. Some people stopped outside the buildings and I could see another group of people were in a building further down. The people trapped outside were screaming, begging to be let in, but the smoke was almost at the door, so none of us near the door wanted to be the one to sacrifice everyone in the room for a couple of people outside. The smoke came so quickly, it engulfed the people in front of our building so quickly and made its way along the path to the next building. The entire front of the building was just white smoke. We couldn't even see the people outside of the door anymore, it was so thick. It was probably just seconds, but it felt like minutes that the smoke was passing in front of the building. And then it passed. The people outside, they weren't screaming anymore, they were just stood there, expressionless, looking at us. What the fuck did it do to them? What's wrong with them? Why are they just staring at us? I heard people cry throughout the room. Turning to see where I was, it looked like a cafe that wasn't fully finished. Painting was half done, There were chairs and tables in the corner of the room, a huge blackboard above what was probably supposed to be a checkout that featured no menu. Even worse, I couldn't see Amy. I lost her when I fell over. I turned back to the people outside and she isn't there though, so she must be in that other building further down. With that, the group outside all simultaneously turned and started walking to the left, towards the entrance. Within a few seconds they were gone. I tried to go to the door to find Amy, but a group of people inside stopped me. "You aren't going out there, nobody's opening this door. We sit here and we wait for help," a man shouted at me. I'm not one for confrontation, so I just backed down. I sent a text to Amy, "Where are you? I got knocked down, are you safe? Are you inside? I'll come and find you, I love you 30." Message not sent. I've been sat for 45 minutes. On my phone I can see the world happening but can't interact. I can see Facebook updates from friends but can't message or upload my own status. Twitter's the same. I tried Pokemon Go to try and take my mind off what was happening. No Pokestops, great. My last go-to app was Coinbase. Bitcoin's up 2.4%. I'm still not a millionaire, but that's a start, I guess. I got bored of scrolling through Facebook and Twitter and decided to hit up Reddit instead. I scrolled for a few minutes before seeing a cat wanting attention, upvoted. I thought I couldn't interact with the world. But Reddit seems to work. Maybe because I don't use the Reddit app, maybe my web browser works normally. So here I am, writing this out to you to kill the time. 1:54 p.m. I've had a chat with the man with the daughter. He's called Mark, his daughter's Molly. If I had to describe him in a word, it'd be lumberjack. He's about 6 feet 5 tall and about the same wide, pure muscle mass. Molly's almost 5, she likes dinosaurs and Moana. Her mum died a few months ago. Cancer. This is their first outing since they moved up here a couple of years ago for Mark's work. He's a software engineer, imagine that. A software engineer that can bench the weight of 3 people. Katie, his late wife, was diagnosed a couple of months after the move. All the while I can't stop thinking about Amy. She must be in that building further down. But what if she isn't? What if she was out of sight outside when the smoke hit? Anyway, thinking like that won't help. Assume the best and prepare for the worst, right? Considering this building should be a cafe, there's a distinct lack of food here. Except for the packed lunch people brought. Myself included. Mark had packed lunch for him and Molly too, and we invited a couple over who were huddled together looking outside. I guess it's best to pass the time together right now instead of dwelling on what we've seen. 4:18 p.m. The couple are Greg and Lauren. They remind me of Amy and myself. Mid-20s, just started their careers and are looking to settle down into their life together. Greg's in construction and Lauren sells beauty products. Greg plays Fallout and World of Warcraft, so we've got mutual interests. 10:04 p.m. Mark, Molly, Greg, Lauren and myself have kind of made a group now. Emergency services still aren't here, and why would they be? Nobody can contact them. How are we supposed to get out of here? Anyway, the room full of people have spread out. We've made a kind of camp here and luckily we all have enough space to lay down so we can sleep. There's a bathroom with running water so we're good for that, but food's going to run out. Luckily I'm a big guy who shopped while hungry for our packed lunch, and even though I shared my food with Greg and Lauren, I still have enough to last me tomorrow too. Mark and Molly are almost out, they've got sandwiches left for breakfast. I'll share my food with them after that. I hope Amy's okay. I'll update you guys tomorrow. Maybe I'll be a Bitcoin millionaire, or who knows, there might suddenly be a Pokestop right outside. A guy can dream, haha. 2:40 a.m. There was another bang in the distance. I hope everyone's okay. Story 13, The Dangers of Road Rage. I'm not gonna lie and act like I have more patience or saintliness than other people. I find driving to be relaxing because I can yell and rage at other drivers. I do the raging with the windows rolled up, following at a safe distance behind those other drivers. My mom set me up for that, I think. She was the kind of sweet woman who'd coo at inanimate objects and give appliances names and things. She had an endless well of tolerance for everyone and everything. A little flaky, maybe, in hindsight, but the good kind of flaky that this world needs more of. If you ask me, you can't get mad at what you don't understand, she'd tell me. Some asshole was tailing her on a 2-lane road, honking or screeching trying to pass. She'd just shrug and say maybe he's late for something important. Maybe his wife's in labor. Maybe he's trying to get to his dying father's bedside. If she didn't know, she couldn't judge. But today in particular something happened that I can absolutely not explain, not to the cops I filled out reports for, and not for anyone I know personally. I'm gonna talk about it here and hope someone can take something from it. So this afternoon, right after work, I'm heading home to my apartment. It's an easy drive from the town where I work to the town I live in, but the road goes from 4 lanes to 2 for about 3 miles, with some pretty heavy curves and woods blocking any sight lines. We get tourists through here a lot, trying to find their way to Tahoe or one of the ski resorts, which means we get a lot of problematic drivers. Either the young brothers in their clean new SUVs who think they can handle every turn on this 45-mile-per-hour road going a flat 90, or the family of 4 being driven by a mom who carefully meditates about it before thinking about considering the idea of applying even the slightest pressure to the gas pedal. I'm a server at a restaurant, tourists pay my rent, but Christ do I hate driving among them. So I'm right at the point where the 4-lane road cuts down to 2, and up ahead I see a potential problem. There's a minivan, one of those 90s Ford jobs that already looked 10 years old the year they came out. And I'm catching up to it so fast that I just know they're going at least 10 miles under the speed limit. I reach it in a snap, hit the brakes without getting too close, and I pray for patience. The road is too curved to pass without risking an accident, and, velp. Staring that back of this Aerostar is going to be my next 10 minutes. It's times like this that I think about my mom. I sit back, sing along with the radio, and think about what she would say about someone driving 25 miles per hour in a 45. Maybe they're dropping their kid off at college and this is the last few hours they'll have together for months. Or maybe they're heading for a funeral where they'll be surrounded by awful family for hours and they just want to postpone it. Whatever. The van in front of me it's hard to describe. It's unremarkable in every single way, this slightly darker than baby blue shade that's dusty from the road, a license plate so boring that even after staring at it for 10 minutes solid I couldn't tell you what it was. And the woman driving, I catch glimpses of her through her side mirror, the few times I accidentally get close enough to really look. And from what I could tell she was one of those mousy, sharp-featured women who could have been 25 or 55 or anywhere in between. I think I could have stared her dead in the face from a foot away and still not been able to pick her out of a lineup if I had to. The only remarkable thing about the van was how she was driving it. She would slow down bit by bit until I was going 15 miles per hour to keep from riding her ass like a jerk. And then she'd speed up to almost the speed limit before slamming on the brakes to toddle back down to 20. I had the thought, real clearly, that she was trying to piss me off, which made no sense, but it probably would have worked if I didn't know the road was splitting off again in another mile or 2. As it was I turned up the radio, clenched my hands around the steering wheel, and drove along under the speed limit muttering unhappily to myself. And then a second asshole comes along. Like I said, the roads are super curved, so I had no idea there was anyone behind me until I glanced at my rear view mirror and realized that his 10-foot-tall fucking truck was so close to my ass that I couldn't even see his plates. This guy obviously didn't have a mom like mine, because in seconds he's honking, he's swinging the wheel trying to pass me, he's gunning the engine, and I bet anything if my music was quieter I would have heard him shouting. Something in me just goes ice cold, looking from him filling up my rear view to her puttering along happily in front of me. For a second I think, this is some kind of setup. They're gonna trap me between them like some weird crime plot on Law and Order, knock me off the road or rob me or something. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I knew something was wrong. There's not a real shoulder on this road, but there's not a drop-off between the road and the trees. So I tolerated about 30 seconds of this dude testosteroning behind me before I yanked the wheel and hit the brakes and pulled to what side of the road there was. Luckily he was just waiting for the opportunity, because he screeched his big-ass blue truck around my suddenly fragile feeling Honda, and within a second he was honking again, trapped behind Miss Minivan. In moments they were around another curve, out of my sight, though I could still hear his horn. I took a minute, sat there and unclenched my fingers from the wheel and took deep breaths and tried to tell myself that things were fine now. I figured I'd sit there long enough for them both to get back to the 4-lane road, and then I'd be free to make my way home without having to worry about either of them. I give myself until the current song ends, tell my heart to stop beating so fast because like there's nothing happening here, and then I pull out into the road and press the gas, just wanting to go the speed limit finally. In less than a minute the lanes divide and stretch wider in front of me. Instead of feeling relieved, though, my heart starts beating faster again. The big blue truck is half on the side of the road. Engine idling, driver's door hanging open. The horn is blasting, long and constant and unwavering. I hit the brakes unconsciously as I pass, looking over. And, Christ! It's red. Everything is red. So dark red it's brown. It's on the windshield, the driver's window, the grey of the interior of the door, and the seats. It's dripping down to the footboard, and to the street below. There's something in the driver's seat, leaning against the steering wheel, but I can't tell what it is. You know that thing where you have anxiety over little moments but something big happens and somehow you're able to get through it calmly? That was me right then. I pulled over in front of the truck, grabbed my phone and had 911 dialed before I left the car. I'm halfway through stammering to this bored-sounding operator about where on the road I think we are, when I make it around the open door of the truck and see what it is that's blaring the horn. It's the driver. I think it's the driver. It's a human-shaped thing. Torso-shaped. It's nothing but slick red all over. No clothes. No arms, no head. No skin. Just pulsing red, dripping down everywhere. The air tastes like iron. I can't say anything else to the operator, but somehow I'm not freaking out. I'm just looking at how this slimy red flesh mass has been propped, so that what's left of its neck is digging into the wheel, making the horn blast out into the air. I think I'm not freaking out, but I realize I'm sucking in way too much of that old penny-tasting air and my phone's not in my hand anymore, and if I back away any further I'm going to be in the middle of the street and holy shit, what even is this? The cops get there fast, luckily. Unluckily, the two in the first car that pulls up don't seem to know what to do beyond running to the edge of the trees and puking. But I talk to them. I don't say anything about seeing the truck before, since it sounds insane to say that whatever happened to this guy must have happened in about 45 seconds. Traffic's still coming and going, but of course it slows to a crawl, worse when the ambulance and other cop cars start coming in. They can't close the road, I know, since there's no other route to get back to town. I'm back at the cop car, finishing up my useless statement, watching the cops all stand around hoping they won't have to get any closer to that truck. And through the line of creeping rubberneck traffic comes a light blue Aerostar minivan. I think I felt it before I saw it, but maybe I'm just freaked out. I watch it, though, old and generic and invisible among the sharper SUVs that fill the road around here. I stare, and I see the woman, the driver, full on for the first time. Soccer mom. Completely unremarkable thin mousy little woman. She seems content behind the wheel toodling along with the gackers. But there's something makes my stomach flip and my body go cold all over again. Something I can't identify. When she passes the truck she doesn't so much as glance over. When she passes the police car I'm leaning on, though, she does look. A slow turn of her head, a stare dead on me even as she keeps driving steadily. Happy, I think to myself out of nowhere. She looks really happy. And I wonder if I should point her out to the police, but something in her smile makes me go mute. Right before she passes entirely by, she lifts a hand, and now I see what was so wrong, what I noticed unconsciously. Her hands are stark white, way too large, way too thin, like they've been pressed flat, ironed out. I don't see fingernails. I don't know what the fuck I see. She folds those long, white, flat fingers down, all but one. She holds that one up to her still smiling lips. SHH. Then she's past me, and I stare after her. I see in the window as her hands fold around the steering wheel again, fingers curling like pale tentacles around it. The slow traffic hits the merge into two lanes, and I watch as a widening gap appears between the van and the car in front of her. She's slowing down. Even in this slow cop-controlled traffic she's slowing further down. And the car behind her, this bulky Dodge Charger, hits its horn. I don't know what to think, now that I'm home and the whole thing feels more and more surreal. I think I saw something I shouldn't have seen. I think whatever that woman-looking thing really is, I think I shouldn't have gotten as good a look as I did. I think it scares the shit out of me that it got as good a look at me as it did. But maybe it's okay. Maybe I passed some test, when I followed her earlier and kept my cool and stayed polite. Maybe she needs some kind of permission to do whatever the hell she did to that truck driver. Some kind of asshole threshold that has to be reached. I don't know, though. I don't understand. When you don't understand, my mom would say, you can't get mad. And since I think she saved my life tonight, maybe I should just listen to her. And if anyone who reads this has a road rage issue and lives around Lake Tahoe, I think you should listen to her, too. Story 14, when I was in high school, I tried to kill myself. When I was in high school, I tried to kill myself. Sorry for being so upfront about it, but I got to a point in my life now where I hate the fact that we stigmatize depression so much. By talking openly about my experience, I've learned that so many people out there have felt like I felt at some point in their lives. So many more people have battled depression and suicide than I ever could have imagined. I wonder if I had known that, if maybe it would have helped me through back then. If I had known that if I could just be open and talk to someone about my struggles, maybe I would have done that instead of trying to take my own life. But back then, I believed that to be depressed was to be weak, and to be weak was to be broken, and to be broken was to be defective, and to be defective is to be unworthy of living in this world. A lot of things came crashing down on me all at once. I don't want to talk too much about it just yet. I haven't gotten myself there. But I thought I finally reached the end of my rope, so one night, I tried to kill myself. I went in the hallway closet and took every pill I could find. I scavenged through my bathroom and read every label. I took everything that had a poison control warning, put it in a water bottle, and chugged a disgusting suicide smoothie. I wanted to make sure that there was no possible way I would see another day in this ugly, ugly world. And the worst thing imaginable happened after that night. I woke up the next morning. My alarm for school went off. The sun was shining in my windows. I heard my parents talking amongst themselves in the kitchen downstairs. I was still alive. I didn't know how it was possible, but I was still here, and I was pissed. The only sign that all of the crap I had put in my body had any effect on me whatsoever is the dark red clot of blood that I spit out into the sink after I brushed my teeth. Well, maybe some damage had been done. Maybe I'm still alive today, but hopefully that at least considerably shortened my lifespan. What could I do? What choice did I have but to keep living this life, to get through one more day, and maybe try again that night? Still, on my way out, I stopped by that hallway closet again and crammed a few more pills down my throat. Maybe I just needed a little something to put me over the edge, and I would black out dead at school. I could hope. But I didn't. I made it through the school day. And for some reason, all of the reasons I was dreading it, all of the reasons why I was driven to attempt suicide the day before, they all started to resolve themselves. I tried to kill myself the night before. And then I went to school, and I actually had a really good day. It was an alarmingly good day, actually. I did well on the test that I didn't actually study for. I figured I didn't have to study, because I would be dead for it. The friend I was fighting with wanted to make amends. I had volleyball practice after school, and the coach that I thought hated me informed me that I would be starting our next match. It was the best day I had seen in God knows how long. And the weird thing is, it didn't stop there. When I came home that day, I looked at the empty pill bottles and the water bottle I had chugged, and I found that I didn't really want to try again. And the days kept getting better. I got straight A's that semester. I made tons of new friends throughout the rest of my high school career. I became a standout on the volleyball team, and even got attention from college recruiters. On the surface, this sounds like the classic positive, encouraging message, you know, that suicide doesn't eliminate the chances of your life getting worse, it eliminates the possibility of it ever getting better. Because I attempted suicide, and it didn't work, and I should be thankful, because my life is so great now. But I'm fucking terrified. I'm terrified, because overnight, my life suddenly got too good to be true. Everything worked out for me. I got into a good college on an athletic scholarship, and I became a starter. I got a 4.0 GPA in college while playing volleyball and working a part-time job in graphic design, a career I always longed to pursue. I got the internship of my dreams. I made amazing friends. I watched amazing movies, and heard amazing music. And before graduation, I landed the perfect job at an incredible salary. This can't possibly be real. There's no way my life could improve so drastically, so quickly, unless something was up. This can't be real life. As things kept getting better, my state of mind kept getting worse, because I grew suspicious of every little thing that went my way. I could neglect to study for an exam, and come away with a near-perfect score. I could make a lazy play in a game, and it would somehow land on the other side of the court for a point. No matter what I did, it ended up being the right thing. No matter what I tried, I ended up being good at it. It was like my life was suddenly incapable of being bad. It was all too good to be true. It couldn't possibly be true. Suddenly, the good things in my life gave me panic attacks. Suddenly, I wanted bad things to happen to me, just to prove that they could. Because I had so much worry. I was so terrified. My mind kept going back to that day in high school that I tried to kill myself. There's only one possibility, one explanation, that I had done it. The only logical explanation is that my parents found me the next morning, sprawled out in my bed, dead as a doornail. That the people I had grown so close to, the friends I never thought I would have, mourned me at my funeral instead of laughed with me in the halls during our senior year. That my parents sat at the table in grief every year on my birthday, wishing to have me back instead of celebrating with me and going out to eat at all my favorite restaurants. The only logical explanation is that I had done it. I had killed myself, and this life I'm living now isn't real. It's too good to be real. This has to be heaven. But how could it be heaven? Because suicide is a sin. If I had killed myself, I would be in hell. Unless, maybe this is hell. All of this worry, and fear, and panic attacks. Maybe hell is giving you all of the good things you always wanted, until you drive yourself crazy wondering what you did to deserve them. I don't deserve any of these good things. I'm still the same defective kid I was when I took all those pills. Why would God be looking out for me now? This had to be hell, because the more I thought about it, the more I lost my mind. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was no longer happy. I was miserable. I laid awake every night and thought over every tiny little thing that has happened in my life since that day I tried to kill myself. I tried to remember anything in my life that had gone wrong. Anything I wanted that I hadn't received. I couldn't. Which means this couldn't be real. It felt like Inception, a little bit. My life felt like that spinning top. If I were dead, it would be spinning forever. If I were alive, it would topple. It wouldn't topple until I thought of some way my life had gone wrong since that day. I drifted further and further into this insanity. I took notebooks with me everywhere I went, at the ready, prepared to take note of any tiny little thing that went wrong. Maybe I would step in gum. Maybe I would get caught out in a rainstorm. Maybe I would misplace something important to me. Anything. I wanted anything to go wrong in my life. I started trying to get things to go wrong in my life. If there was rain in the forecast, I would sit outside and wait to be drenched, but the sky would always clear. I would try to go out of my way to stick my foot in a nice pile of that bright pink bubble gum, only to find out it was dried up and didn't stick anymore. I couldn't make bad things happen anymore. The better my life was, the worse it was getting. This had to be hell. I kept going back and forth, trying to convince myself that this was real life. Trying to find ways to prove that I was actually alive. When I pinched myself, it hurt. Did that count? I thought about all of the people that I had talked to since deciding that depression shouldn't be stigmatized anymore. Maybe the reason I had found so many people like me, who have battled depression, who have tried to kill themselves, is because we all succeeded, and we were all paying the price for it in hell, together. I realized that there was only one way to find out for sure whether or not I was alive. I had to try to die. In a way that couldn't be denied. No pills or suicide smoothies that I could reasonably wake up from. I had to find a way to make sure that I died. If I didn't, I would know it was hell all along. But what if I did? What if I did die, and I had really been alive this whole time? What if I really have just been living this wonderful life, and I should be happy that I stayed alive for it? But I wasn't happy. Not even close. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't live not knowing. I had to know, or I had to die. There is only one thing left to do. It's time to climb to the roof and see if I can fly. Story 15, my old basement had something in it. About 3 years ago I moved away from a house, and it's been abandoned ever since. I am now 18, and I was 5 when I moved into the house. One thing that always fascinated and confused me was, on the back porch, there was a large wooden door set into the ground that opened vertically to reveal a basement. Calling it a basement is an overstatement, though. All the walls were just packed dirt, there was no lighting, cobwebs everywhere. The only tell that someone had had something planned for the room was the broken apart stone walls that seemed to be trying to divide the room in half. When I moved in, I noticed something odd about the basement. It had a wall in the far back, away from the door, that was dug away irregularly, like someone was trying to dig their way out from inside the basement. There have been no crimes recorded here, so I have no idea what it was. It doesn't stop there, though. It wouldn't make a good story if it did, huh? Every night, I'd be kept awake by something scratching. When I was younger, I believed it was the monsters that everyone talks about having under their beds. As I grew older, I figured that there must be something that is attracting wild animals to the basement, only to have them locked in and trying to escape. This doesn't make sense, though, as the heavy wooden door was the only entrance point to the basement. Every morning, I'd check it, and the hole in the back had been dug slightly deeper than it was the day before. My first real encounter with something odd down there was when I was 7. I'd go down there with a flashlight and read a book, since my older brother liked to bully me a lot whenever I read. As such, I'd hide down there to get away from him, as I was the only one that ever felt comfortable enough to go down there, as it creeped everyone else out. I, however, liked the silence of being down there, with the walls deafening the noise from outside. One day, as I was reading one of my books, I heard a soft scraping coming from behind me. I thought a rat had gotten loose down there, so I shined my flashlight around, trying to figure out what had been the cause of the noise. I found nothing other than some dirt falling from the hole. This would happen maybe once a week for the next 2 years, until I was 9. I decided to try and make the basement into a proper room for myself, since mine had been turned into more of a storage room. I dragged a mattress down there, set up some candles, I even took a lot of extension cords so I could hook up a television down there and play my games. This was fine for a few days, but one day after school I came home to find the mattress torn to shreds, the television broken on the ground and the PlayStation somehow torn in half like it was as flimsy as a piece of paper. I asked my mom about it and she said she hadn't heard a thing all day. All of these events lead up to one big event, the last time that I would ever enter that basement. When I was about 10, I got fed up with being kept up by the scratching. I decided to go and investigate, and let out whatever had gotten trapped down there, so I did just that. However, when I opened the door, the only thing that greeted me was a large gust of wind. From the underground basement, with no contact with the outside world to create a breeze. Carried by this breeze was the singular word, leave. I was obviously spooked and closed and locked the door and left. I still heard the scratching, but I learned to ignore it. I didn't go back down there until I moved, but now something has brought the memory back up. I decided to post this here to ask for advice. I guess, I want to figure out what's happening, but I don't know how. Please, no sleep, help me. Story 16, I found a bunch of notebooks in my grandma's house and weird stuff is happening now. Hi, I'm Alex, 19, broke college student, fun stuff. My grandma passed away a couple months ago and as her only living relative I got her house. A beautiful 2-story old house that was built by my family a very long time ago. Anyway, I found some notebooks written by some grandparent, it's never really mentioned who, that my grandma hid away I guess for some reason. Some weird stuff started happening when I was reading them but I'm trying to ignore it and tell myself it's nothing. It's nothing crazy, soft knocking or creaking around the room I am in, whispers from other rooms, and footsteps. It's an old house so creaking is easily written off and it's summer so I have windows open explaining the whispers as wind. As for the footsteps I blame my dog mostly since he's exploring a lot. Let's get into the first book now. March 23rd. We finally found the perfect place to make home. Big open field, close to a forest and a river. And it isn't close to anybody. Building the house starts in the morning. That is all I have to write and light is getting low. Goodbye. March 24th. We started collecting supplies today, some went to town while others stayed here to start clearing out space for our house. Odd things are happening while we work. Michael hit his foot while chopping wood. Jacob fell ill. And Mary burned her hand severely while making breakfast. The wounded have been tended to while Jacob rests, a cloth wetted in river water on his head to help the fever. I must stop writing to eat and sleep. Goodbye. At this point in my reading a decorative plate of my grandma's fell about 2 feet away from me, shattering. My dog went nuts and came to protect me I guess then calmed down and went to lay back down. Continuing with the book. March 25th. Jacob is getting worse quickly. The other 2 that were injured are getting better but Jacob is pale and sweating heavily while coughing. The others that went to town should be home tomorrow. Nobody was injured today, thankfully. Mary's hand is healing as is Michael's foot. I'm going to get some work done before the light is gone. Goodbye. March 26th. The others are still not back and Jacob passed away. We took him deep in the woods and buried him. A funeral was held around the fire and we spent the rest of the day mourning. Work continues tomorrow. We are running out of food and are quietly praying that the rest come back soon. Goodbye. March 27th. The others returned and brought plenty of food and supplies along with strangers to help us. We started building immediately and made a lot of progress, finishing the floors of most of the rooms and started digging for an underground room for storage. We all are very tired and are going to sleep soon. Goodbye. I heard footsteps upstairs but my dog is laying by the couch I'm on. I know I'm the only one home. I don't want to check it out. The next entry is the last one in this book. Short I know but the others are thicker from the look of it. Let's hope right. March 28th and 29th. This is the last of my paper for now so I may not write for a while. I didn't write yesterday so I will explain what happened before continuing to today. We started building walls and putting flooring in. One of the strangers fell ill with seemingly the same thing as Jacob. He is resting and his friends are helping him as much as they can. Today the young man seemed better but not by much. He ate and drank but still had a fever. We hope he gets better. A part of the wall narrowly missed me when it fell over. We put it back up and secured it properly while checking the other walls we have built. I will continue writing when I get more paper. Goodbye. That is all that's written and I'm going to work on finding out who it could be writing these. I also need to work on school and go to work, so it may be a couple days to post the next book. There are about 4 more books and I haven't even looked at them yet. I'm going to bed now. Let's hope the noises don't kill me or keep me up. Story 17, R.I.P. Jeremy Whittaker. Yesterday was an awful day. The final chapter. There was only one more thing I had to do before I could let go. It was a bad day, but I'm tough, so I made it through. Don't judge me. I needed to know. I just needed to know. So I could move on with my life. Can you blame me? He had a closed casket. Who decided that? Why? What were they hiding? I deserved to know. They had no business hiding the truth. They owed me closure. He owed me that much. My back hurt. I wasn't used to the work. And that shovel was just too small. I wished I had the key to the excavator. It would have been so much faster. But loud. Way too loud. Damn it. I could barely reach deeper. Where was I supposed to put all that dirt? It was getting almost impossible to dig deeper. And why did they have to pack it down so hard? They just made my job harder. I needed to get down there. I didn't know how I would get back out, but did it really matter? As long as I knew for sure, I knew it would all be okay. I would find a way back out. Whoa, I was cold down here. I didn't expect it to be so cold and damp. I had been sweating at the funeral earlier. I couldn't stop sweating. Other people were uncomfortable too. I could tell. Nobody could stand still. Not even the minister was comfortable. He kept looking at me with his strange eyes, his curious, searching eyes. So I had looked back at him even harder. I wonder if he ever peeks inside the caskets. I should have asked him. He probably would have helped me. Or asked them to leave the tent up. It would have been nice to have some privacy out there. The trees were droopy and stood too close. And then there was the thunder. It would decide to rain right then. After all, it always rains at the most inconvenient times. It rained on picture day my senior year of high school. Can you imagine? I had spent so much time getting my hair to lay flat and straight, and then it rained. Who wants to look like a poodle in their yearbook picture? I sure didn't. But rain does that. It just crashes the party uninvited and ruins everything. My back was freezing. It felt more like snow than rain. And my shoes were getting ruined. He probably would have laughed if he'd seen me then. He would have laughed with his eyes squeezed shut and his mouth wide open. He had such perfect white teeth. Perfect except for that one molar capped with silver. Personally, I think it made him look more distinguished. It all would have been worth it to hear him laugh again. I always did like that sound. I recorded it once. He was telling a joke at a party, and I stood very close so I could catch it. Then I got to listen to his laugh whenever I liked. It was muffled by my coat, and too many other people were talking, but it was definitely his laugh. After a few days, I deleted the rest of the recording and only kept his laugh. I hated waiting for it. I just wanted to get to the point. I'm efficient like that. That shovel wasn't efficient at all. It was taking forever. And then my hands started bleeding. Damn it. Nothing was going right. All he'd had to do was tell them to leave the lid open. Don't people get a final wish that everyone has to obey? It would have saved me a lot of trouble. I could have been at home eating soup in front of the TV last night, but instead I was slaving away out there in the dark. He wasn't ever considerate of my needs, though. But that's how love is, right? You have to be selfless when you love someone. He just loved the kids more than me. And that meant he had to be inconsiderate. He was consistent. Consistently inconsiderate. I liked the way that sounded. I bet if I had said it out loud, people would have been forced to stop and think about it. Then they would get stuck with funny blank looks on their faces. People do that a lot when I speak because they're just too slow. He never did. But he was really, really smart. He was a Mensa like me. I don't know if he ever tried to join, but if he did he would have definitely been accepted. He was that smart. Oh. I found it. I couldn't believe I had managed to dig that deep. I doubt they really buried him 6 feet down. That's pretty deep, and I could tell they were lazy. I watched them digging the hole early in the morning, and they kept taking breaks to look at me and talk to each other. They acted as if it was their first day on the job. I asked to speak to their supervisor, but the big one said he was the supervisor and made me leave. They probably stopped digging as soon as I was gone. The mud was getting way too heavy. That last shovelful fell right back in. I was too tired to throw out any more. I needed to get it open. Damn. That's when I realized I had left my bag up top. I had to climb out and then back in again. The coffin was pretty solid. It held my weight easily. Solid and strong like him. I figured I would be able to slip back in like those slides at the water park, only it was a mudslide. I laughed at my own joke. He would have laughed too, but I didn't say it out loud. Maybe I'm too possessive. I don't usually share my jokes. People stare and roll their eyes too much, anyway. They wouldn't understand why I was laughing anyway. Not unless they were as smart as he was. Then they might have. I decided my clothes were going into the garbage when I finished. I was way too muddy to ride the bus home. I had to walk anyway if I wanted to keep my new shovel. After all, they wouldn't let me bring my other shovel on the bus, and that one was still clean. I had to buy this one down the street. The pimply boy at the check stand had asked me what I needed a shovel for. I told him I needed it to dig a hole. It was a pretty stupid question, but I try to be polite and answer everyone, even if they don't make a lot of sense. Finally, I made it back into the hole. His hole. The hole that I dug. Ha. I dug his grave for him. Which is silly, of course, because he was already in it. But it was quite an accomplishment all the same. Not many people could dig a hole that deep and wide. And not everyone knows how to use a cordless drill. I needed to be extra careful. I needed to cut through the wood without hitting him. Actually, it didn't turn out to be very hard at all. My hands slipped a bit because of all the mud, and they were still bleeding, but I doubt it went all the way through the padding. Then I was able to use my saw for the rest. I had planned it all perfectly. I've always been good at making plans. Then I smelled him. He really did stink. I hadn't been expecting that. He always used to smell so good. Maybe that's why they closed the casket. His wife was always talking about organic this and natural that. I heard him complaining about it once. She was so selfish. She probably didn't even have him embalmed. Who skips that these days? It really doesn't make sense. But then, nothing she does ever makes sense. He was stupid to marry her. He was smart with everything else, but just plain stupid about her. I tried to tell him, but he never listened. And there he was lying there stinking because she thought it would save a baby seal to let him rot faster. See what I mean? She's completely illogical. That really was a nice suit. I bet that was the nicest suit he owned. The fabric was shiny, even though it was very dark down there. I had to pull out my flashlight to see him better. He was not as handsome anymore. With his skin so grey and his eyes and lips sewn shut, he looked ghoulish. Even so, I could tell it was him by the scar above his left eye. He never told me how he got it, even though I asked 6 times. I stopped asking after a while because I realized he must have been embarrassed by the story. I used to play a little game. Every time I saw his picture in a magazine, or a newspaper or on the television, I would try to find his scar. Sometimes it was covered up by makeup if he was doing an interview. Other times I could tell that they had put the picture backwards because it was on the wrong side. They had no attention to detail. They shouldn't be called journalists. They were sloppy, just like the grave diggers were. I looked everywhere, but I just couldn't find it. I was starting to get agitated. I knew he didn't put himself in there, so maybe it wasn't his fault. But he did promise. I remember it clearly. Fortunately, I had my own copy with me. Like I said, I was prepared. I wedged the picture under his folded hands. I leaned back a bit to evaluate the scene. Actually, I didn't like it, after all. His hands were folded over his stomach. I thought it was more appropriate to put it under his lapel, next to his heart. I always slept with it by my heart, so my idea had a beautiful symmetry to it. It was artistic. I leaned back against the muddy walls and surveyed my work. The coffin lid was a mess, but that was okay. He was laying quietly on white satin with the photo of us embracing in front of a brick building laying above his resting heart. I can't remember the name of the building. There were so many people and cameras that day, but we were able to steal a quick moment together before everyone got too crazy. I will always remember the look of joy and surprise on his face when I hugged him. I had waited so long that I just couldn't contain myself. That perfect moment was captured forever by one of the news cameras. I couldn't have planned it better myself, and I'm really good at planning. After our meeting, I had been forced to wait almost 2 weeks before I was able to slip him his copy. I'd made him promise not to tell anyone about us. I'd asked him to keep the photo a secret. The truth would have torn his world apart, and I couldn't do that to him. He swore he would take it to his grave with him, but yesterday I found out that he didn't. But it's okay now. I fixed it. I've always looked out for him. I know he appreciated it. He couldn't tell me, but I could see it in his eyes. That's when the night finally caught up with me. I was too tired to put all the dirt back in. I decided those slobs with the excavator could do it in the morning. They needed a day of honest labor. And I needed to get home and clean up. I must have looked awful. I was always so careful about how I looked if I thought he might see me. Oh, well. I guess that doesn't really matter anymore. Goodbye now, Jeremy. I'll miss you. Story 18, today was not a normal day at work. I work in a clothes store, and tonight, I was tidying up after close. I went about my usual duties, picking up rubbish that had been carelessly discarded by shoppers, putting the clothes back in their rightful places, basically autopiloting my way through the dull routine which has been my Saturday every week this year. Anyway, I was just finishing hanging some clothes around the front of the store, when I was stopped dead in my tracks by the sensation of someone's breath on my neck. Very funny, Marcus. I said with a shake of my head. Marcus is the wind-up of our store, so I figured it was his familiar mischief again. No one was behind me when I turned around, however. The rest of my colleagues were working at the back end of the store, too far away to have done anything from such a distance. All of a sudden, I felt a daunting feeling wash over me. Almost as if I was being watched. Turning around again, I could see nothing of threat, but I just couldn't shake the growing feeling that something was behind me. My hands began to tremble, as I placed the last of the pile of clothes I'd held, on their rightful hangers. It hit my shoulder suddenly, with a hard and painful force. The pale white hand contorted, gripping at my shoulder. Not a human hand, but unmistakably the hand of a mannequin. A scream failed in its struggle to escape from my mouth. Frozen, I simply observed the physical manifestations of my fear, every minuscule bead of sweat that had started collecting in my palms, every unsuccessful cry for help. The other hand of the mannequin then started its climb to my left shoulder, until its malicious grip tightened around the both of them. "What the fuck? How did you get that thing off of there?" said Marcus, snapping me out of my immobility. A startled shake of my body, and the mannequin immediately rolled to the side so it lay perfectly on its back, the arms outstretched but static once again. The mannequins at our store are bizarre. Their eyes are like the eyes on baby dolls, which close as they're tilted. Despite this, the eyes of this one remained wide open. I clearly couldn't hide the terror plastered on my face as Marcus' smile faded and he asked with genuine concern if I was all right. This is very unlike him. He takes the piss 24/7. I couldn't bring myself to utter a word of what I saw to him though, or rather, what I thought I saw. I just helped him place the mannequin back, which requires slotting it onto a long pole, which goes through the entirety of its body, think Vlad the Impaler style. How could it come off on its own like that? Pretty sure everyone thinks I pulled it off of there now. How could they not? I really don't know what to think currently, but I can't sleep. So, instead I write this, in the hope that someone can give me a logical explanation for what happened. Story 19, we weren't allowed in the basement. I very vaguely remember my childhood house. We had moved out of it so long ago that most of my memories there were hazy and borderline forgotten. But one thing that remained clear as day after all these years was a basement. My parents back then would never allow my sister and I to venture into the basement because it was no place for kids, as my dad would say. We never questioned his warnings, but as children we wanted to explore everything. I never exactly thought much about our basement, but my sister would bring it up every moment she could. Her curiosity for the basement clung onto her like a plague, and it spread to me. I ended up spending most of my time wondering what could be hidden in the basement and why we couldn't go in. It got to a point where we were prepared for whatever consequences we were about to get for breaking our parents' rules. When they told us they were going out for dinner to spend their anniversary, it was as if a door had been unlocked and opened wide for us. We waited an hour before my sister snuck into our dad's study and took the key off of his desk. She hung it in front of my face with a cunning smile, but the key gave me a sick feeling and I told her I didn't think it was a good idea anymore. She rolled her eyes and dragged me to the basement door despite all my protests. She stuck the key into the keyhole and took a deep breath, preparing herself, and unlocked the door. It opened with a long creak and revealed a dark and empty room. Well, almost empty. In the center of the room sat a huge metal box, something like a safe. My sister scoffed at the sight and went towards the safe. I could feel my palms getting clammy and the uneasy feeling in my stomach just kept getting more and more intense. She ignored my pleas to stop and leave the basement and put her hand on the handle of the metal safe while I stayed closer to the door. Every sense in my head and body was screaming for me to leave, but for her sake I stayed. I watched as she opened the door of the safe. It opened with the sound of heavy metal opening. I saw her freeze before she got up and stumble backwards. I froze myself when the sound of tapping on the metal came from its many legs as it crawled out and hissed at us. It looked like a giant fleshy human centipede. My sister screamed and bolted towards my direction. She grabbed my wrist and managed to pull me out of my frozen state, both of us sprinting out of the basement door. We shut the door and locked it, our hearts beating so loud it sounded like rapid drumming. The slamming on the door sent our relief flying out the window and my sister started crying, fearing that the door couldn't hold whatever was on the other side. I threw my body on the door, hoping that I could keep it at bay just long enough for someone to come for us. The slams stopped the moment our parents came running to the top of the stairs. Our dad yelled at us for ignoring his warnings as our mum tried to console my sister before ushering us to bed. That night I woke up to our window wide open, wind blowing at our ruined and ripped up curtains. I stood up and went to her bed only to find her teddy bear sitting upright on the bed and specks of blood on her bedsheet. My mum cried for days, hoping that the Amber Alert would help bring her back to us. Our prayers were answered when she came home a few days later. My mum hugged her so tight she would have popped, but I saw something wrong with her. Something in her eyes wasn't right. Her eyes just looked blank, dazed, dead. That night she attacked me while I was sleeping, trying to bite at me. I screamed and our parents came barging into our room. My dad tackled her into the ground and kept her in a lock as my mum called the police. My sister ended up being sent to the mental ward of the hospital. Once again my mum felt as though she had lost her little girl. It was only a week after she had been sent off when we got a call from a nurse saying that my sister had killed herself in her room. They found her covered in a pool of her own blood and a knife in her hand. They said she must have stolen it from someone because there was no way any of the patients would have a knife on them. Her death broke our family, my parents going their separate ways as I moved out with my dad to live somewhere else. Something about the incidents tells me that she didn't kill herself because she wanted to. I knew that metal box had something to do with it, and I think whatever took my sister is coming for me now too. My dreams have turned into images and visions of just the box, and the familiar metal tapping has started to come from my window. I fear that I don't have much time left. Story 20, I want my epilepsy back. I used to be a severe victim of epilepsy. Every week, up to once a month, I would suffer from a seizure. Sometimes it would happen in my sleep, but other times it would happen while I was behind the wheel. In fact, one time I even had it while walking up the stairs. As you can tell, this greatly disrupted my lifestyle in a negative way. I couldn't do basic and trivial tasks without some caretaker looking after me to see if I wouldn't have an episode. Any basic task you would take for granted would be a challenge for me. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Recently, there was word of a new surgery which would apparently cure or at least treat my severe epilepsy. They called it corpus callosotomy. Being that I would do anything to get better from my epilepsy, I thought that I had nothing to lose. I thought I would become normal. In about a year's time, I had saved up enough money to go ahead and get this surgery. I was excited. When I walked to that front desk and heard the nurse say I would get the surgery, I couldn't hold myself still. Even my caretaker noticed the excitement that was flooding out of me. I waited around 25 minutes before the doctor finally walked out and let me into the surgery room. Every step I took was another shot of adrenaline. This is finally happening, I thought, blinded by my sheer joy of becoming a better me. I've lived with my epilepsy for over 17 years now, and having the thought come to your mind that you are finally free and independent is almost too good to be true. I reached the surgery room and sat down at the operating table. The doctor and I talked for a good 10 minutes before I was put under a shot of anesthesia, and drifted into a deep sleep. An hour later I awoke, to which the first words I heard were congratulations. The surgery was a success. I was so happy that I had a very large and visible smile on my face, but something felt a bit off. I couldn't tell what changed, but I felt as if I wasn't me anymore. I brushed it off. Maybe that was one of the symptoms of actually getting this surgery. Though, what I couldn't understand was the looks of both the doctors and caretakers' faces. They both looked at me with a look of confusion and worry. I tried to ask them why they looked at me like that, to which I then realized I couldn't speak. Thinking this might have been a symptom of the surgery, I brushed it off. "You're free to go now," the doctor said in a monotonous, stuttery voice. It sounded as if the doctor noticed something that wasn't supposed to happen. I felt a subtle feeling of dread in my chest, fearing that the surgery maybe wasn't a success after all. However, I simply brushed it off and focused more on how epilepsy-free I am. That was when things started to get a little weird. It was a month after I came home from the hospital, and I haven't experienced any epileptic attack at all. The doctor recommended I stay housebound until the effects of the surgery wear off, letting my caretaker take care of the meals and the house. However, every day for the past month, she always looked at me with that same face she had in the operating room. The look of confusion, worry, disbelief, and disgust. I always brushed it off, thinking somehow the surgery affected my appearance, or maybe that she just hated looking at me. I mean, she was my caretaker for over 17 years now. I'd understand why she wouldn't like taking care of a crippled epileptic. However, this morning it was different. After finally getting out of my bed for the first time in 5 weeks to change into a new pair of shirts and pants, my right arm started to act a bit funky. Every time I would try and do something, it would always just curl up into a fist and punch everything repeatedly as if it was scared. The first time I got out of bed required the assistance of my caretaker. I couldn't seem to speak, and I thought it was just another passing symptom of the surgery, so to get her attention, I banged on the floor with my left hand, considering almost the entire right side of my body was paralyzed. However, the weird thing was, when she came into my room, my right arm and leg would all of a sudden start attacking her. I figured that it was maybe an epileptic attack, which shattered my hopes of becoming fully independent. However, the most horrifying moment was when I heard myself speak. It was so slurred and so full of terror that a feeling of intense dread and surprise washed over me, almost blinding me. I could just barely make out the words, "Stop it. Who are you? Stop attacking me." That one sentence was enough to get her to let go of my entire body, and back away slowly. I tried to apologize but realized I couldn't as my mouth was still paralyzed. I just stared at her, pity in my eyes, as she backed away outside my room, then started to walk faster downstairs, but not full-on run. I tried to push my body out of bed using my left hand and foot, but the right side of my body would always try and keep me in bed. After about 2 minutes of trying to get out of bed, I raised my fist and knocked as hard as I could on the floor. I could only get 2 knocks in before my right hand would try and grab my fist, preventing me from getting any more knocks. After a long fight between me and the right side of my body, I heard the front door unlock, open, and then slam shut. Moments later, I heard her car engine start up and speed out of my driveway. Around the same time I heard her car speed out, my phone got a message. Your caretaker has cancelled their subscription. Tap here to leave feedback. My jaw and eyes dropped. I've never felt this hopeless and lonely in my entire life. Unable to get out of my bed, and with nobody else in my home to help me, I fell flat onto the bed sheets and sobbed, with my right hand cleaning the tears off my face. Sometime after, I got over myself and went to my phone. I picked it up, went onto the camera app, and switched the camera to the front. After I saw what nobody else should see, I understood their faces now. The entire left side of my face was completely normal, and what I expected. However, the right side was almost completely black. The pupil of my right eye was dilated so much that it completely covered the iris, but with a look of terror to it. I could tell that it was open for almost the entire month I was in bed, because of the concentration and sheer amount of redness surrounding it, with the mouth being half open. Upon first glance, I threw my phone outside the open window, hearing it collide with the concrete driveway 2 stories below. 3 months later, I've decided to write this to you all. Whatever you do, do not get this surgery. After these months of sitting in my bed, lonely and hopeless, I came to a conclusion. What if this was hidden from us for a reason? What if this wire, connecting the 2 hemispheres of the brain, was there solely to prevent this madness from ever happening? What if it is there just to shield this separate intelligence from us, to keep it in order, to keep us oblivious to this hellish demon? I want the days back from when I used to be able to roam the streets, only needing the supervision of someone else. I want the days back when I could be and do whatever I wanted. I want my epilepsy back.